She made me feel loved, not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, in a steady way. She checked in, she listened, she remembered the small things, and the crazy part? I didn't know what to do with it. Because when you're used to chaos, consistency feels unfamiliar. When you're used to chasing, being chosen feels suspicious. She wasn't confusing, she wasn't distant, she wasn't playing games, she was just there. And for some reason that scared me more than anything. Healthy love feels calm, and when you're used to chaos, calm can feel boring. There were no mixed signals, no guessing games, no hot and cold energy. She didn't make me question where I stood, and that was new. I was used to intensity, late night arguments, emotional highs and lows, passion that felt like a roller coaster. With her, it was steady, and instead of relaxing into it, I started looking for something wrong. Because when you've been conditioned to associate love with anxiety, peace feels unfamiliar. You mistake stability for a lack of spark, consistency for predictability, security for missing something. But the truth, nothing was missing. I just didn't know how to receive love that didn't hurt first. Sometimes we don't sabotage love because we don't care. We sabotage it because we don't feel worthy of it. She showed up consistently, she communicated clearly, she didn't make me chase, and instead of feeling grateful, I felt exposed, because when someone loves you properly, they see you, not just the confident version, not just the charming version, the insecure parts too, the guarded parts, the parts that still haven't healed. And when you don't fully love yourself, being loved deeply feels uncomfortable. You start thinking, what if she realizes I'm not as solid as I seem? What if she expects more than I can give? What if I mess this up? So you create distance first, you act unsure, you slow down, you convince yourself the timing isn't right, not because she wasn't enough, but because you didn't feel like you were. I told myself it wasn't the right time, that I needed to focus on myself, that I wasn't in the right headspace, that something felt off, but if I'm being honest, nothing was off. I was just scared of being responsible for something real. Scared of being consistent, scared of not being able to hide behind confusion anymore. Because when someone loves you right, there's no chaos to blame, no mixed signals to point at, no drama to distract you. It's just clarity, and clarity means accountability. I couldn't say she didn't show up, she did. I couldn't say she wasn't serious, she was. So the only thing left to question was myself, and that's harder than walking away. You don't always realize what you had while you have it. Sometimes you realize it in the silence after, when the good morning texts stop, when the consistency disappears, when the calm you once questioned is suddenly gone. And that's when it hits. She wasn't boring, she was safe, she wasn't too available, she was intentional. She wasn't lacking spark, she just wasn't chaos. I confused stability with something missing because I was addicted to intensity. And now that it's quiet, I see it clearly. She wasn't asking for too much. She was offering exactly what I claimed I wanted, and the hardest part is realizing she didn't leave because she didn't care. She left because I hesitated. Growth doesn't always happen while you're in something good. Sometimes it happens after you lose it, after the silence, after the distance, after you sit alone with no one to blame but yourself. That's when reflection hits differently. You replay conversations, moments you brushed off, times she asked for reassurance and you gave her half answers, not because you didn't care, but because you weren't mature enough yet to handle something healthy. And the painful part, you finally become the version of yourself that she needed, clearer, more emotionally aware, more ready, but she's not there anymore. And that's the lesson. Sometimes the right person meets you at the wrong version of yourself, and losing them is what forces you to grow. Now the question is different. Do I reach back out, or do I let her have the peace I couldn't give her before, because missing someone isn't the same as being ready for them? Regret can feel like growth, loneliness can feel like clarity, but are you actually different, or do you just miss how she made you feel? That's the part nobody talks about. It's easy to want someone back when you finally understand their value. It's harder to admit you might still not be the version they deserve. Reaching out isn't about easing your guilt. It's about being certain you won't repeat the same pattern. Because if she loved you right once, she deserves someone who can love her right back. And if that's finally you, then show up differently. If it's not, let her be loved properly by someone who was ready the first time. Being ready isn't about having your life perfect. It's about emotional responsibility. It's about being able to communicate without shutting down, being consistent without feeling trapped, being vulnerable without running when it gets real. I thought being ready meant having money right, career right, timing right, but she didn't need perfection. She needed presence. She needed reassurance without having to beg for it. She needed clarity without having to decode it. She needed someone who didn't confuse peace with boredom. And the truth, I wasn't emotionally disciplined enough. I liked being loved, but I wasn't ready to love back at the same level. And that's the difference. Being ready means you don't just enjoy the love, you reciprocate it fully. Was losing her a mistake, or was it a lesson I had to learn the hard way? At first it felt like a mistake, like I let something rare slip through my hands, like I fumbled the one person who actually showed up right. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized something. If I wasn't ready, I would have hurt her eventually. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but through inconsistency, through hesitation, through emotional immaturity. And she didn't deserve that. Sometimes the loss isn't punishment, it's preparation. Preparation to become the version of yourself who doesn't run from healthy love, who doesn't confuse peace with boredom, who doesn't sabotage stability. Maybe she wasn't meant to stay forever. Maybe she was meant to show me what real love looks like, so I'd stop settling for less and stop being less. And that doesn't erase the regret, but it gives it meaning. Will she ever know how much she meant to me? Probably not in the way she deserved, because when she was loving me out loud, I was loving her quietly. When she was certain, I was unsure. When she was present, I was half in. And now that I finally understand her value, it's in hindsight. But here's what I do know. She raised my standard, not just for what I want, but for who I need to be. She showed me that love doesn't have to be chaotic to be real, that consistency isn't boring, that reassurance isn't weakness, that stability is rare, and maybe she'll never know how much she changed me. Maybe she'll never know that losing her is what forced me to grow. But one day, when I love someone the right way, fully, clearly, consistently, a part of that will be because of her, because she loved me right, even when I wasn't ready, and that's something I'll always respect. For the longest time I thought she loved me, not just liked me, not just enjoyed being around me. I thought she actually loved me, because she talked to me every day, she wanted to know what I was doing, she asked about my life like it mattered to her. And when someone shows you that kind of attention, it's easy to believe the feelings behind it are real. So I believed it. I believed the late night conversations meant something deeper. I believed the way she smiled when we talked meant she cared. I believed all the time we spent together was building something real. But looking back now, I think she didn't love me. I think she loved the attention. There's a difference. When someone loves you, they care about who you are, your thoughts, your struggles, your future. They care about the person standing in front of them. But when someone loves the attention, the focus isn't really on you, it's on how you make them feel. The compliments, the validation, the feeling of being wanted. And for a while I was giving her all of that. I was the person who always answered, the person who always listened, the person who always showed up when she needed someone to talk to. And I thought that meant I mattered to her, but eventually I started noticing something strange. Whenever I pulled back, she suddenly came closer. Whenever I stopped giving her attention, she started reaching out again. Not because she missed me, but because she missed the way I made her feel. And that's when something started becoming clear. Maybe she didn't love me the way I thought she did. Maybe she just loved having someone who cared about her that much. Once that thought entered my head that maybe she didn't love me, maybe she just loved the attention, I started seeing things differently. Moments that once felt meaningful started feeling different. I remembered how often she reached out when she was bored, when she had nothing going on, when she needed someone to talk to, and every time I was there, answering her messages, listening to her problems, giving her reassurance whenever she doubted herself. At the time, I thought that's what love looked like, two people being there for each other. But when I really looked at it honestly, something felt uneven, because when she needed attention, I was always available, but when I needed support, it didn't always feel the same. Sometimes she would disappear. Sometimes the conversation would suddenly end. Sometimes it felt like the connection only existed when she was the one who needed it. And that's when the difficult question started forming in my mind. Was she actually interested in me? Or was she interested in the way I made her feel about herself? Because attention can be addictive. When someone constantly reminds you that you're special, that you're wanted, that someone cares deeply about you, it feels good. Really good. And some people don't fall in love with the person giving them that feeling. They fall in love with the feeling itself, the validation, the reassurance, the comfort of knowing someone is always there. And I think that's what I was to her. Not a partner, not someone she truly wanted to build something with, but someone who gave her a constant source of emotional attention. And the moment I started seeing that pattern, everything began to make more sense. The more I thought about it, the more patterns started standing out, because when someone actually loves you, their presence in your life is consistent. They don't only show up when they need something. They don't only reach out when they're bored. They don't only care when the attention is focused on them. But with her, the connection always seemed to revolve around how she felt. If she had a bad day, I was the first person she called. If she felt insecure, I was the one reminding her how amazing she was. If she needed someone to listen, I was always there. And at the time, I thought that meant I was important to her. But eventually, I noticed something uncomfortable. When I had a bad day, she wasn't always there the same way. When I needed reassurance, the conversation would shift quickly. When I tried to open up about my own struggles, it didn't always hold her attention for long, and that's when it started feeling like the relationship wasn't built around us. It was built around her receiving and me giving, and the scary part about that kind of dynamic is you don't notice it right away. Because when you care about someone, giving feels natural. You don't keep score. You don't measure every moment of effort. You just show up because you believe the connection matters, but slowly you start realizing something. You're the one holding most of the emotional weight. You're the one keeping the conversations alive. You're the one making sure the connection doesn't fade. And when you stop doing that, everything changes. That's when the real truth shows itself. Because the moment I stopped giving her constant attention, something strange happened. She didn't start fighting harder for the connection. She didn't try to understand what changed. Instead, the distance grew. And that's when I realized something that hurt more than the breakup itself. She didn't miss me. She missed the attention I gave her. Realizing that she didn't miss me, she missed the attention, was one of the hardest truths to accept. Because when you care about someone deeply, you don't want to believe that your place in their life was built around something that shallow. You want to believe the connection meant something real, that the conversations mattered, that the time you spent talking late at night actually meant you were building something. But once I started paying attention to the pattern, it became impossible to ignore. Whenever I gave her attention, everything felt great. She was warm, engaged, interested. She would laugh more, reply faster, make it seem like we had this deep connection. But the moment that attention slowed down, everything changed. Suddenly the conversations felt shorter, the interest faded, the energy shifted, and that's when it finally clicked. Her feelings weren't connected to me. It They were connected to the attention I was giving her. Because when someone loves you, their connection doesn't disappear just because the attention changes. But when someone loves the attention, the moment that validation slows down, so does their interest. And looking back now, that explains everything. Why she would suddenly become distant, why she would come back the moment I stopped reaching out, why the connection always felt strongest when I was the one giving the most. It wasn't love, it was validation, and I was the person supplying it. Once I finally understood that she loved the attention more than she loved me, a lot of things started making sense. For the longest time, I kept wondering why the connection always felt unstable, why some days she seemed completely invested, and other days she felt distant, why the energy between us depended so heavily on how much I was giving. At the time, I thought that was normal. I thought relationships just had ups and downs. But there's a difference between normal ups and downs and a connection that only exists when one person is constantly feeding it. And that's what this was. Whenever I was fully present, texting first, asking about her day, complimenting her, showing that I cared, everything felt good between us. But when I pulled back even slightly, the dynamic changed immediately. The warmth disappeared, the conversation slowed down, and the connection that once felt so strong suddenly felt fragile. That's when it became impossible to ignore what was really happening. Because love doesn't disappear just because attention shifts for a moment, but validation does. Validation needs constant reinforcement. It needs someone to keep providing that feeling of being admired and wanted. And once that source slows down, the person who depended on it starts looking for it somewhere else. That's when I realized something that hurt more than I expected. I wasn't the person she loved. I was the person who made her feel important. And once you realize that difference, you start understanding the relationship in a completely different way. Once that realization settled in, that she loved the attention more than she loved me, something inside me started shifting. At first it hurt more, because it meant all the things I thought were meaningful might not have meant the same thing to her. All those long conversations, all the moments where she told me things she said she didn't tell anyone else, all the time she said she appreciated having me in her life. I thought those things meant we were building something real, but now I started seeing them through a different lens. Maybe she didn't say those things because she loved me. Maybe she said them because she loved the feeling of having someone who cared about her that much. And that's a dangerous dynamic, because when someone becomes your main source of validation, it feels powerful. You feel admired, you feel important, you feel like someone is always there to remind you that you matter. But that feeling isn't the same as love. Love cares about the person giving the attention. Validation only cares about the feeling it creates. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something uncomfortable. Whenever I tried to shift the focus of the relationship, whenever I wanted something deeper, the energy changed. If I asked serious questions about where things were going, if I talked about building something more stable, if I needed emotional support myself, that's when the connection suddenly felt weaker. Almost like the relationship only worked when I was the one giving, not when I needed something back. And that's when the truth became impossible to ignore. The relationship wasn't built on mutual connection. It was built on attention, and I was the one providing it. After I understood that the relationship was built more on attention than love, another uncomfortable truth started showing itself. I wasn't just giving attention, I was maintaining the entire connection. I was the one making sure the conversation didn't die. I was the one checking in first. I was the one asking how she was doing, making sure she felt heard, making sure she felt valued. And at the time, I didn't see that as a problem. When you care about someone, putting in effort feels natural. You don't think about it like a transaction. You think about it like loyalty. But over time, I started noticing something. The relationship only felt alive when I was feeding it. Whenever I stepped back, even a little, everything started fading. The messages slowed down, the energy dropped. The connection that once felt strong suddenly felt fragile, and that's when it hit me. Love doesn't disappear the moment someone stops giving constant attention, but validation does. Validation needs fuel. It needs someone constantly reminding you that you're wanted, that you're interesting, that someone is thinking about you. And the moment that fuel slows down, the person who depended on it starts feeling empty. That's when they either come back asking for more, or they go find someone else who will give it to them. And I think that's what I was to her. Not a partner, not someone she truly wanted to build something with. I was a source of attention, a source of validation, a source of emotional reassurance. And once you realize you were someone's source, not their choice, the whole relationship starts looking different. Once I accepted that I was just a source of attention for her, something else started becoming clear. The connection only existed when it benefited her emotionally. Whenever she needed reassurance, I was important. Whenever she felt lonely, I mattered. Whenever she needed someone to remind her that she was attractive, interesting, or worth talking to, suddenly I was the person she wanted to talk to again. But the moment she felt good again, the moment that emotional gap inside her was filled, something would change. The urgency would disappear. The replies would slow down, the energy would fade, and I would sit there wondering what I did wrong. For a long time, I blamed myself for those shifts. I thought maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I didn't keep the excitement alive. But once you understand the difference between love and attention, everything makes more sense. Love stays even when the excitement fades. Love stays even when you're not constantly entertaining someone. Love stays even when the validation slows down for a moment. But attention doesn't work like that. Attention is temporary. It's something people chase when they need to feel good about themselves. And once they get that feeling again, they don't always need the person who gave it to them anymore. Looking back, that explains why the connection always felt inconsistent. It explains why some days she felt deeply invested in us all, and other days it felt like she barely noticed I existed, because I wasn't the person she loved. I was the person she turned to whenever she needed to feel important. And once I saw that clearly, the whole relationship started making sense in a way it never had before. For a while, realizing that hurt more than anything else, because nobody wants to believe they were just someone's source of attention. You want to believe the connection meant something deeper. You want to believe the time you invested mattered in the same way for both of you. But eventually something changed in the way I saw it. I stopped feeling embarrassed about how much I cared, because caring deeply isn't the problem. The problem is giving that level of attention to someone who only values the feeling it gives them. And that's a big difference. There's nothing wrong with being loyal. There's nothing wrong with showing up for someone you care about. The mistake is believing that everyone who accepts your attention values it the same way you do. Some people appreciate attention, other people depend on it. And the people who depend on it will keep you close as long as you keep feeding that feeling inside them. But the moment the attention stops, the connection disappears, not because they suddenly stop liking you, but because the feeling they were chasing isn't coming from you anymore. And once you understand that, something inside you changes. You stop chasing people who only show up when they need something. You stop investing in connections that only exist when you're the one giving, because you realize something important. You deserve someone who values you, not just the attention you give them. Looking back now, I don't think she loved me, but I also don't think she was pretending the whole time. I think she genuinely liked how I made her feel. She liked the attention. She liked the reassurance. She liked having someone who consistently reminded her that she mattered. And for a while, that was enough to keep the connection alive. But attention alone can't build something real. Because the moment that attention stops, there's nothing holding the relationship together. And that's exactly what happened. Once I stopped constantly feeding the connection, it disappeared. At first that felt like rejection, but now I see it differently. It wasn't rejection, it was clarity, because it showed me the difference between someone who loves you and someone who only loves the feeling you give them. And once you see that difference clearly, you stop blaming yourself for the way things ended. You realize you weren't losing someone who truly valued you. You were losing someone who valued what you provided. And that's not the kind of connection worth holding on to. One day I'll meet someone who doesn't just enjoy the attention I give them. Someone who actually cares about the person giving it. Someone who chooses me even when the excitement fades. Someone who values the connection, not just the validation. And when that happens, I won't feel like I'm constantly proving my worth, because the right person doesn't stay for the attention, they stay for you. She replaced me in a week, 7 days, and I've replayed that number in my head more times than I'd like to admit. Because when something you invested months, maybe years, into gets swapped out in 7 days, it doesn't just hurt, it destabilizes you. It makes you question your perception, it makes you question your value, it makes you question whether what you had was ever real in the first place. I keep thinking about how we ended the conversations, the tone, the way she said she needed time, the way she said she had to focus on herself, and then a week later there's someone else standing where I used to stand. So what was the truth? Was she grieving while I was still loving? Was she detaching while I was trying? Was I the only one still emotionally present toward the end? Because you don't replace someone in a week unless you were already halfway gone. That's the part that keeps echoing in my mind. You don't wake up on Monday heartbroken and by Sunday decide you're ready for someone new. That's not healing, that's transition. And if she transitioned that smoothly, that quickly, then maybe I wasn't as permanent in her world as she was in mine. And that realization stings more than the breakup itself, because breakups hurt. But being replaced fast, that attacks your identity. It makes you feel temporary. It makes you feel interchangeable. It makes you feel like you were just holding a spot until something better came along. And I hate that my mind even goes there. But when someone replaces you in a week, you start asking dangerous questions. Was I not enough? Was I boring? Was I too available? Did she already have him lined up? Was I just comfortable, not essential? And the scary part is, your brain doesn't just ask those questions, it starts believing them. You start comparing yourself to someone you don't even know. You start imagining that he must have something you didn't. More excitement, more dominance, more money, more mystery, more something. And now it feels like you lost a competition you didn't even know you were in. But love was never supposed to be competitive. It was supposed to be intentional, chosen, protected. And if she could swap me out in 7 days, then maybe what we had wasn't as protected as I thought. Maybe I was fighting for something that was already slipping away. Maybe I was loving someone who had already emotionally exited. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that she found someone new, but that she found someone new that quickly, because that speed tells a story. And I'm still trying to figure out what that story says about me. I think what really messed with me wasn't just that she replaced me, it was how effortless it looked, how natural she made it seem. Like I was just a chapter she flipped past without rereading, because I'm still here sitting with it, still replaying the last conversations in my head, still wondering if I missed signs, still trying to understand where it actually started falling apart, and she's already smiling next to someone new. That kind of speed doesn't just hurt, it humiliates you. It makes you feel like you were the only one emotionally invested at the end. Like while you were trying to fix it, she was already detaching. Like while you were thinking, we just need time, she was thinking, I need someone else. And the scariest part, I don't know which version of reality is true. Was she already talking to him before we ended? Was I slowly being phased out while I was still trying to show up? Or did she just move on that fast because she can't be alone? Every scenario hurts in a different way. If she was already lining him up, then I was loving someone who was preparing my replacement. If she just needed validation that quickly, then I was never the emotional anchor I thought I was. And if she genuinely didn't feel anything after it ended, then maybe I meant less than I believed. That's what a 1-week replacement does to your mind. It makes you question the entire foundation. You start rewriting memories. That time she seemed distant, that time she picked a fight out of nowhere, that time she said she felt confused. Now they don't feel random anymore. Now they feel like early signs of an exit. And the worst part is realizing that you might have been the only one still emotionally inside the relationship toward the end, because you can't replace someone in a week unless you were already halfway gone. And that's the sentence that keeps echoing. Halfway gone. Maybe she left emotionally months ago. Maybe I was loving someone who had already checked out. Maybe the breakup wasn't the beginning of the end. Maybe it was just the announcement, and that realization shifts the pain, because now it's not just heartbreak, it's feeling blindsided, it's feeling like you were operating on outdated information, like you thought you were both building, but she was already packing. And I hate that this makes me question my value, because logically, I know someone moving on fast doesn't define me, but emotionally, it feels like it does. It feels like I was replaceable, interchangeable, temporary, and nobody wants to feel temporary in something they treated as permanent. I keep thinking about how deeply I committed, how I shut down distractions, how I defended her when people doubted us, how I chose her repeatedly. And now it feels like I was the only one guarding something she was willing to trade. That's what makes it feel unfair. Not that she moved on, but that she moved on like it was easy, like I was just space that needed to be filled. And that's the dangerous thought, because I wasn't just space. I was time, I was effort, I was loyalty, I was presence. And if she could replace all of that in 7 days, then either she never fully valued it or she never fully processed it. And I don't know which one hurts more, because if she didn't value it, then I misjudged everything. And if she didn't process it, then she's just distracting herself. But distraction still feels like replacement when you're the one left behind. And I'm left here trying to rebuild confidence that got shaken by a 7-day timeline, trying to remind myself that speed doesn't equal significance, trying to remember that depth doesn't get erased overnight, because if what we had was real to me, then it was real, even if she replaced it quickly. But still, 7 days. That number doesn't just represent time, it represents how fast someone can move on when you thought you meant more. And I'm still trying to figure out what that says about her and what it doesn't say about me. The part nobody prepares you for is how fast replacement attacks your confidence, not just your feelings, your confidence, because heartbreak hurts your chest, but being replaced quickly hits your ego. And ego isn't pride, ego is identity. It's how you see yourself. And when someone moves on in a week, your brain starts filling in blanks you never wanted to think about. You start comparing yourself to someone you don't even know. What does he have that I don't? Is he more exciting, more unpredictable, more emotionally unavailable, more dominant, more detached? Did she need someone less steady, less serious, less invested? You start dissecting yourself like you were the problem to be solved. And that's dangerous, because now it's not just about her moving on, it's about you feeling like you lost to someone else, like this was a competition, like you were weighed against another option and didn't measure up. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about. If someone can replace you in a week, they didn't replace you. They replaced the role, they replaced the attention, they replaced the space, they replaced the feeling of not being alone. But connection, real connection, that doesn't get swapped that quickly. You can substitute company, you can substitute validation, but you can't duplicate depth overnight. And I have to keep reminding myself of that, because when you see them laughing together, posting together, looking comfortable together, your mind doesn't care about logic. It sees images and it translates them into meaning. They're happier. She upgraded. You weren't enough. But images don't show history. They don't show inside jokes. They don't show late night vulnerability. They don't show how deeply you invested. They show a moment, and moments are easy to manufacture. Depth takes time, and if she replaced me in 7 days, then either she had already emotionally left long before we officially ended, or she doesn't process loss the way I do. And both are hard to accept, because if she left emotionally before I did, then I was loving someone who was already gone. And if she doesn't process loss deeply, then I was loving someone who doesn't sit with pain. She escapes it. And escape looks like replacement when you're the one grieving. I won't lie though. Part of what hurts is feeling disposable. Like I was just a chapter. Like I was just a phase. Like I was someone she needed for that season. And once it was over, I was easy to move past. But here's what I'm starting to understand. People who move on that quickly aren't necessarily healed. They're avoiding, they're filling silence, they're covering discomfort, because sitting alone after a breakup is uncomfortable. It forces reflection, it forces accountability, it forces grief, and not everyone has the emotional discipline to sit with that. Some people run straight into the next distraction, not because the previous person meant nothing, but because feeling nothing feels easier than feeling everything. And I need to remember that her timeline isn't a measurement of my worth. It's a reflection of her coping style. Still, that doesn't erase the sting, because I'm still here thinking about what we had. Still processing, still grieving, still reconstructing my confidence, and she's already building something new. That imbalance feels unfair, like I'm stuck in emotional traffic while she sped through the exit ramp, and maybe that's the hardest pill to swallow. Not that she found someone else, but that she found someone else while I'm still untangling myself from what we were. It makes you feel behind, like you're losing, like you're weaker for caring longer, but caring longer isn't weakness, it's depth, and depth doesn't reset in 7 days. So maybe the real truth is this: she replaced the position, but she didn't replace the impact. And if what we had was real to me, then it mattered, even if she chose not to sit in it, even if she chose speed over reflection, because I would rather be the one who feels deeply than the one who forgets quickly. 7 days might look like replacement, but sometimes it's just avoidance in disguise. And one day, when the distraction fades, she might finally sit with what I've been sitting with this whole time, and by then I'll be further ahead emotionally than she ever was, not because I moved on faster, but because I actually processed it. And that's something nobody can replace in a week. The worst part about her replacing me in a week isn't even the new guy, it's the silence that came with it. Because when someone moves on that fast, they don't just leave you, they erase you. The calls stop, the inside jokes disappear, the routine you built together vanishes, and suddenly the person who used to know your schedule, your moods, your patterns is giving that attention to someone else. That's what makes it feel unreal, because it's not just that she found someone new, it's that she redirected everything so easily. The same energy, the same time, the same effort, just different face. And that's when your mind spirals into the dangerous place. If she can give someone else what she gave me that quickly, was it ever special? That question hits hard, because we don't just want to be loved, we want to feel irreplaceable. We want to feel like what we built had weight, like it left a mark, like it couldn't just be swapped out like a profile picture. And when she replaced me in 7 days, it felt like I was lightweight, like I was something she could carry easily and set down just as easily. But here's the thing I keep wrestling with. Maybe it wasn't easy. Maybe it just looks easy. Social media never shows grief. It doesn't show reflection. It doesn't show confusion. It shows highlights. And maybe what I'm seeing is the highlight reel of her coping. Because moving on quickly doesn't always mean you didn't care. Sometimes it means you can't sit still with pain. Sometimes it means you need distraction to avoid accountability. Sometimes it means you'd rather build something new than examine why the last thing broke. But none of that makes it easier to watch, because while she's building new memories, I'm still dismantling old ones. I'm still processing the last conversation, still remembering the way she used to look at me, still trying to figure out when it started fading. And that imbalance makes you feel like you lost twice. You lost the relationship, and you lost the race to move on. And I hate that it feels like a race, because healing shouldn't be competitive. But when someone replaces you in a week, it feels like you're the only one still standing in the wreckage, like she walked away from the crash without even looking back, and you're still checking for broken pieces. What hurts even more is knowing I didn't have a backup. I didn't have someone lined up. I didn't have a just in case. When we ended, it was just me in the silence, and I chose to sit in it, not because I wanted to suffer, but because I respect what we had enough to process it properly. So when she jumped into something new that fast, it felt like I was the only one honoring the history, like I was the only one treating it like it mattered, and that's a lonely feeling, to believe something was significant and watch the other person treat it like it was temporary. But maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe she didn't replace me. Maybe she replaced the feeling of being alone. Maybe she replaced the discomfort. Maybe she replaced the emptiness, because some people don't know how to sit with themselves after something ends. They need noise. They need attention. They need someone new to prove they're still wanted, and if that's the case, then her moving on in a week says more about her relationship with silence than it does about my value. Still, that doesn't stop the thoughts, because at night, logic fades and emotion gets loud, and in those moments, it feels like I wasn't enough. Like if I had been better, stronger, more exciting, more something, she wouldn't have moved on that fast. But I have to remind myself, you can be enough for someone and still not be there forever. You can love someone deeply and still not be what they're built to keep. And if she could replace me in 7 days, then maybe I wasn't meant to stay in her life long term. Maybe I was a lesson. Maybe she was mine. But what I refuse to accept is that I was insignificant, because I know how I loved, I know how I showed up, I know how I committed, and those things don't become meaningless just because someone else moved quickly. If anything, they prove something about me, that I invest fully, that I don't keep backups, that I don't treat people like placeholders. And maybe that's rare. Maybe that's why this hurts more, because I wasn't halfway in. I was all the way in. And when you're all the way in, being replaced feels like being erased, but I'm not erased. I'm just healing at a pace that reflects depth, and depth doesn't reset in 7 days. So yeah, she replaced me in a week, but that week doesn't define my worth. It defines her coping speed. And one day when she finally slows down, she might realize you can replace a person's position, but you can't replace the way they loved you. And that's something no one swaps out in 7 days. There's a different kind of pain that comes from being replaced quickly. It's not just heartbreak, it's humiliation. And I don't mean humiliation in a loud, dramatic way. I mean the quiet kind, the kind where you sit alone thinking, how did I not see this coming? Because when someone moves on in a week, it makes you question your awareness. Were there signs I ignored? Did she emotionally detach months before I noticed? Was I holding on to something that was already slipping through my hands? And that's the part that messes with your head the most. Because now it's not just about losing her. It's about doubting yourself, your intuition, your judgment, your ability to read people. You start replaying moments that once felt normal. That random argument, that night she seemed distant, that time she picked up her phone and turned it away slightly, that period where she felt off but said she was fine. At the time, you trusted her words. Now you question everything, because if she replaced you in 7 days, your brain automatically assumes she had a head start, and whether that's true or not, the damage is the same. It makes you feel like you were the only one fully in it, like you were the only one fighting for something she had already decided to let go of, and that imbalance feels like betrayal, even if technically it wasn't, because the emotional timing didn't match. You were still invested, she was already transitioning, and that creates this gap, a painful one, where you're grieving something she already processed, or avoided, or replaced, and it makes you feel late, like you're the last one to realize the relationship was over, and I hate that feeling, because I don't like feeling behind. I don't like feeling like I was operating with outdated information. I don't like feeling like I was loving someone who had already emotionally packed their bags, but maybe that's the reality. Maybe the breakup wasn't the beginning of her detachment. Maybe it was the end of it. Maybe she had already done her grieving while I was still trying to fix things. And that realization hurts in a different way. Because now it's not just that she moved on fast, it's that she moved on before I even knew we were done. And I'm stuck here wondering when it actually ended. Was it weeks before the breakup? Months? Did she slowly disconnect while I was still showing up? Because that's the part nobody prepares you for. The possibility that you were loving someone who was already halfway gone. And if that's true, then I wasn't replaced in a week. I was replaced long before that. I just didn't know it yet. But here's the thing, I'm slowly starting to understand. Even if she emotionally left before I did, that doesn't make me weak. It doesn't make me naive. It means I was committed. It means I was still trying. It means I was operating in good faith, and I'd rather be the one who stayed genuine than the one who quietly exited without saying it, because I know how I loved. I didn't keep options open. I didn't emotionally detach while pretending everything was fine. I didn't start building something new while something old was still alive. When I was in it fully. And if she replaced me in a week, then that says something about her capacity to detach, not about my capacity to matter. Still, that week will probably always sting, not because of the new guy, but because of what it symbolized. How quickly someone can shift focus, how fast attention can be redirected, how easy it can look to replace what felt permanent. But maybe permanence isn't about how long something lasts, maybe it's about how deeply it was felt. And if I'm still here processing it while she moved on fast, then maybe I was the one who felt it deeper. And that doesn't make me the loser. It makes me the one who actually experienced it. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase what I gave, and I refuse to let her timeline rewrite my value, because being replaced quickly hurts, but being genuine never does. There's something else that hurts about being replaced in a week. It makes you question whether you were ever chosen or just convenient, because if someone can transition that smoothly, that fast, it starts to feel like you were just occupying space, like you weren't irreplaceable, like you were temporary comfort, and nobody wants to feel like temporary comfort. I keep thinking about the way she used to look at me, the way she said things like, I don't see myself with anyone else, the way she made it seem like what we had was rare, and now I'm sitting here wondering how rare something can really be if it can be replaced in 7 days. That's what makes it sting. Because rarity isn't supposed to be swappable, depth isn't supposed to be interchangeable. If something is special, it's supposed to leave a gap when it's gone. But her life doesn't look like there was a gap, it looks filled immediately. And that creates this internal conflict. Was I overestimating my importance? Did I romanticize something that was lighter to her than it was to me? Because when you care deeply, you assume the other person feels the same weight. You assume the attachment is mutual. You assume the history matters equally. But being replaced quickly makes you realize something uncomfortable. Not everyone feels at the same depth you do. Some people attach fast and detach faster. Some people build quickly and rebuild quicker. Some people don't see relationships as something sacred. They see them as something seasonal. And maybe that's the difference between us. Maybe I treat connection like something that deserves reverence, and she treats it like something that deserves momentum, like because momentum doesn't stop, it just redirects, and that's exactly what she did. She redirected. The same attention, the same affection, the same emotional energy, just different recipient, and that's hard to swallow because it makes you feel like the container didn't matter, just the feeling. But here's the part I'm slowly realizing. If someone can redirect their attachment that fast, then maybe what they were attached to wasn't you. It was the feeling of being with someone. And that's not the same thing. There's a difference between loving a person and loving the experience of not being alone. And if she loved the experience more than she loved me, then of course she could replace me quickly, because she wasn't replacing a soul connection, she was replacing the role. And that hurts, but it also clarifies, because I don't want to be someone's role. I don't want to be someone's emotional placeholder. I don't want to be someone's for now. I want to be chosen with intention, held with depth, missed when I'm gone. And if she could swap me out in a week, then maybe I wasn't held the way I thought I was. But that doesn't mean I wasn't valuable. It just means she didn't hold me deeply. And those are two different things. Still, there's something about the speed that keeps echoing. 7 days. It makes it feel like I didn't leave a mark, like I didn't leave impact, like I didn't leave space. But I know that's not true, because impact isn't measured by how long someone stays single. It's measured by what they learned, what they felt, what they carry forward. And even if she doesn't feel it now, one day when the distraction fades, when the excitement settles, when she's sitting in quiet, you might finally process what she skipped, and by then I won't be waiting. Because here's what I'm starting to understand. Being replaced quickly doesn't mean you were insignificant. It means the other person couldn't sit with loss, and loss reveals maturity. If I'm still here processing, still reflecting, still rebuilding, then I'm not behind, I'm just doing it properly. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase who I was, and I refuse to let her timeline determine my value, because I wasn't just someone she dated, I was someone who showed up fully, and that doesn't become meaningless just because someone else showed up faster. She replaced me in a week, but that week says more about her relationship with discomfort than it does about my worth. There's another layer to this that I don't talk about out loud. Anger, not loud anger, not screaming or crashing out. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest when you realize how easily someone redirected what you treated like sacred. Because I stayed loyal, I stayed committed, I stayed focused, and she moved on in 7 days. That makes you question fairness. It makes you feel like you played the game honestly while someone else was already preparing their next move. And I hate that it feels like a game, because I never approached it like one. When I was with her, I wasn't scanning the room for upgrades, I wasn't entertaining backups, I wasn't lining up options just in case. I was in it, fully, and now I'm sitting here realizing she either wasn't or she detached long before I knew. And that's what builds resentment. The idea that I was emotionally present while she was emotionally preparing. Because now it feels like I was loyal to a version of her that didn't exist anymore, like I was committed to something she had already mentally ended, and that realization stings. But here's where it shifts, because the anger starts turning into clarity. If she could replace me that quickly, then she was already disconnecting. And if she was already disconnecting, then the relationship wasn't as mutual as I believed. And if it wasn't mutual, then I wasn't losing someone who was fully invested. I was losing someone who was already halfway out. That doesn't make it hurt less, but it reframes it, because now it's not about me being not enough. It's about her not being anchored. Anchored people don't drift that fast. Anchored people don't swap attachments like playlists. Anchored people sit with loss, and if she didn't sit with it, then maybe she never held it deeply. And that realization hurts, but it also frees me, because I don't want someone who can replace depth with distraction. I don't want someone who needs constant attention to feel stable. I want someone who values history, who respects connection, Who understands that what you build with someone isn't disposable? And if she replaced me in a week, then maybe I was disposable to her. But that doesn't mean I'm disposable in general. It just means she wasn't built to keep me. And there's a difference. Still, there's a part of me that wonders if she ever thinks about it, if she ever pauses, if she ever compares, if she ever realizes how fast she moved, but I can't live in that space, because waiting for someone to feel what you felt is a trap, and I refuse to trap myself in her timeline. 7 days, that's how fast she moved, but here's the truth. I'd rather take my time healing than rush into something new just to prove I can. I'd rather rebuild properly than distract myself temporarily, because I know what I gave, and I know how I showed up. And I know I don't need to rush into something new to validate that. She replaced me in a week, but I'm rebuilding myself at a pace that lasts, and that's not weakness, that's depth. You know what else being replaced in a week does? It makes you question whether you were ever truly seen. Because if someone really sees you, your patterns, your effort, your loyalty, your depth, they don't just slide into something new like you were a temporary rental. They feel the absence, they sit in it, they notice the difference, and I keep wondering if she noticed the quiet after I stopped calling, if she noticed the lack of consistency I used to bring, if she noticed that the stability I provided isn't something you just duplicate overnight, or if she just filled the silence so fast that there was no space to notice it all. That's what hurt, the possibility that I wasn't deeply registered, that I was experienced but not understood, because there's a difference between being with someone and truly knowing them. And when someone replaces you quickly, it feels like they never fully knew the weight of what they had. It feels like they liked the experience of you, not the essence of you, and I can handle someone not choosing me. But it's harder to handle feeling like I was easy to move past. I keep thinking about how careful I was, how intentional I was, how I didn't play games, how I didn't keep backups, how when things got hard, I leaned in instead of pulling away. And in the end, it feels like none of that slowed her down. 7 days. That number keeps echoing like a clock ticking in reverse, because for me, 7 days after a breakup feels raw. It feels heavy. It feels like I'm still adjusting to the silence, but for her, 7 days was enough to build something new. And that contrast makes you feel like you loved harder than you were loved. And that's a lonely realization, because loving harder isn't something you brag about. It's something you feel when the other person moves on faster, and you're left holding the emotional weight. But here's what I'm starting to see clearly. Just because she moved on quickly doesn't mean she processed it deeply. Speed isn't strength. Speed can be avoidance. Speed can be distraction. Speed can be ego protection. Sometimes people rush into something new not because the old thing meant nothing, but because it meant too much. Because sitting alone would force them to face what they lost, and not everyone is strong enough to sit in that kind of silence, and maybe I am. Maybe the reason I'm still here thinking, reflecting, feeling, is because I actually let it hit me. I didn't numb it, I didn't immediately replace it, I didn't run from it, I sat with it, and sitting with pain requires maturity. It requires discipline, it requires emotional depth. So maybe this isn't about me being less valuable, maybe it's about me being more capable of processing, and that's not weakness, that's growth. Still, there's something about knowing she's creating new memories that stings, because those were supposed to be ours. The random laughs, the new places, the inside jokes. Now someone else gets that version of her, and I have to let go of the idea that it was only meant for me. And that's hard, but here's the truth I can't ignore anymore. If she could replace me in a week, then I was loving someone who wasn't built to stay long term. Because people who are built to stay don't detach that fast. They don't redirect that easily. They don't swap depth for novelty overnight. And I don't want someone who can treat connection like it's interchangeable. I want someone who understands the weight of history. Who understands that what you build with someone isn't disposable? Who understands that real attachment doesn't reset in 7 days? So yeah, she replaced me in a week, but I'm rebuilding myself in a way that lasts longer than a rebound ever will. And when I look back at this one day, I won't just remember the hurt, I'll remember the clarity, because being replaced quickly doesn't mean you were insignificant. It means the other person wasn't anchored, and I refuse to confuse someone else's instability with my lack of worth. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase what I was. And one day, when I'm with someone who values depth the way I do, this week won't define me. It'll just be proof that I was never meant to stay where I was easily replaced. At some point, the hurt turns into something quieter. Not lighter, just quieter. Because you can only replay 7 days so many times before your brain gets tired of the echo. And when the noise slows down, clarity starts creeping in. I started asking myself a different question. Not why did she replace me so fast, but why am I measuring my value through her speed? Because that's what I was doing without realizing it. I was using her timeline as a mirror. If she moved on quickly, I must not have mattered deeply. If she looks happy, I must have been replaceable. If she didn't hesitate, I must not have left impact. But that logic is flawed. Her speed is not a measurement of my depth. Her distraction is not a reflection of my worth. Her ability to move forward quickly doesn't erase the way I showed up. And once I started separating those things, something shifted. Because I know how I loved, I know I was intentional, I know I was loyal, I know I didn't treat what we had like it was temporary. So if she did, that says something about her capacity, not my value. And I had to stop turning her coping style into my insecurity, because that's what I was doing. I was letting her rebound rewrite my confidence. I was letting her quick transition convince me I was forgettable. But forgettable doesn't leave you reflecting. Forgettable doesn't leave you rebuilding. Forgettable doesn't leave you questioning your own growth. What we had meant something, even if she chose not to sit in that meaning. And maybe that's the difference between us. I process, she replaces. I reflect, she redirects. I sit with the silence, she fills it. And neither is necessarily wrong, but one builds depth, the other builds distraction, and depth always wins in the long run. Because distraction fades, novelty fades, rebounds lose their adrenaline, and when that happens, whatever was avoided eventually resurfaces, and by then I won't be stuck in the same place, because while she rushed forward, I rebuilt properly, and rebuilding properly takes longer, but it lasts longer too. 7 days might have been enough for her to feel okay, but it wasn't enough for me to lose myself, and that's what matters. So yeah, she replaced me in a week, and for a while that felt like proof that I wasn't enough, proof that I was temporary, proof that I was easy to move past. But now it feels like proof of something else, proof that I love deeply, proof that I don't detach easily, proof that I don't treat connection like it's disposable. Because if I could have replaced her that fast and didn't, that says something. It says I value what I build. It says I respect history. It says I don't jump into something new just to soothe my ego. And I'd rather be the one who heals slowly than the one who forgets quickly. Because forgetting quickly doesn't mean you're strong. Sometimes it just means you're avoiding. And I don't want to avoid. I want to grow. I want to understand what worked, what didn't, what I tolerated, what I ignored. I want to rebuild my confidence without attaching it to someone else's timeline. She replaced me in a week, but she didn't replace my character. She didn't replace my loyalty. She didn't replace my ability to love fully. And one day, someone is going to experience that depth and recognize it immediately. Not treat it like a placeholder, not treat it like a phase, but treat it like something rare. Because rare things don't get swapped in 7 days. They get protected, so maybe this wasn't about me being replaced. Maybe it was about me being redirected away from someone who could move on that quickly towards someone who won't. 7 days hurt, but it also clarified. I don't want to be in a position where I can be replaced that easily ever again. And the only way to guarantee that is to choose someone who understands the weight of what they're holding. And next time, I will. She said I wasn't man enough, and I won't lie. That one stuck, not because I believe it, but because when someone you love questions your masculinity, it hits somewhere deeper than regular criticism. It's not just about behavior, it's identity. It's everything you thought you were doing right suddenly being reframed as weakness. What does man enough even mean? Because I showed up, I communicated, I stayed loyal, I tried to fix things instead of run from them. But apparently that wasn't enough. Apparently being calm instead of aggressive was a problem. Apparently wanting to talk things through instead of shutting down made me soft. Apparently expressing emotion made me less of a man. And that's when I realized something dangerous. Some people confuse masculinity with dominance. They confuse emotional control with emotional absence. They confuse stability with weakness. And if that's the definition she was using, then maybe I was never supposed to fit it. But still, when she said it, it made me question myself. Because no matter how confident you are, words like that linger. They make you replay moments. They make you wonder if you should have been tougher, colder, less available, less understanding. And that's how toxic standards start reshaping you. Quietly, I started analyzing everything after that. Was I too patient, too willing to compromise, too quick to apologize? Because I thought being a man meant being responsible, being accountable, being emotionally mature. But maybe she wanted something louder, more dominant, more unpredictable, and that's confusing because society tells men two opposite things. Be strong, but don't be cold. Be vulnerable, but don't be weak. Lead, but don't control. And somehow you're supposed to balance all of it perfectly. So when she said I wasn't man enough, I started wondering, was I too emotionally available? Was I too steady? Was I not exciting enough? But here's the truth that took me time to accept. Being consistent doesn't make you less of a man. Being calm doesn't make you less masculine. Being emotionally intelligent doesn't make you weak. It makes you evolved. And not everyone is comfortable with evolved. Some people are used to chaos, used to intensity, used to men who are hard to access emotionally. So when they meet someone who communicates clearly and stands firm without yelling, it feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel unmanly to someone who's been conditioned differently. But that's not my problem to fix. The deeper issue wasn't her words. It was what they tried to take from me. My confidence, because when someone attacks your masculinity, they're attacking your foundation. They're saying you're not enough as you are, and that's heavy. But here's what I had to learn. Being man enough means being emotionally unavailable. If it means suppressing how I feel, if it means pretending I don't care, if it means dominating instead of communicating, then I don't want that version of masculinity, because strength isn't loud. It's controlled, it's stable, it's secure enough to not overreact. It's confident enough to not prove itself constantly. And maybe she mistook calm for weak. Maybe she mistook kindness for softness. Maybe she mistook emotional awareness for insecurity. But that doesn't redefine me, it just shows what she was used to. What hurt the most wasn't that she left, it was that she framed it like I lacked something, like I needed to become more, like I needed to step up into some undefined standard. But love isn't about becoming someone else to fit someone's idea of masculinity. It's about alignment. If she needed someone louder, more dominant, more emotionally distant, that's preference, not proof that I wasn't enough. Wasn't. Because being man enough shouldn't mean performing toughness. It should mean integrity, leadership, emotional control, responsibility. And I had all of that, just not in a way that matched her expectations, and that's okay. I realized something important after sitting with it. The right woman won't question your masculinity. She'll feel safe in it. She won't need you to be aggressive to feel protected. She won't need you to be emotionally shut down to feel secure. She won't test your dominance to measure your worth. She'll recognize strength and stability. She'll see leadership and accountability. She'll see masculinity in consistency, because real masculinity isn't about intimidation. It's about presence. It's about knowing who you are without needing to prove it constantly. And here's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes when someone says you're not man enough, what they really mean is, you're not toxic enough for what I'm used to. Because chaos feels passionate to some people, silence feels strong to some people, emotional distance feels masculine to some people, but healthy masculinity feels boring if you're addicted to instability, and that's not an insult, it's reality. Some people equate unpredictability with strength, and when they meet steadiness, they don't know what to do with it. I had to ask myself something hard. Was I actually lacking, or was I just not performing? Because there's a difference. Lacking means I don't possess something. Performing means I'm pretending to, and I refuse to perform masculinity for approval. I refuse to become colder just to seem stronger. I refuse to suppress my emotional intelligence just to look dominant, because the right person won't require that. They'll appreciate it. If anything, being called not man enough forced me to define what that means for myself. To me, being a man means standing on your word, protecting without controlling, communicating without yelling, being emotionally disciplined, owning your mistakes, leading with stability, and I did all of that. So if that wasn't enough for her, it doesn't mean I failed. It means we defined strength differently. I won't let one person's perception reshape my identity, because masculinity isn't loud. It isn't about dominance. It isn't about intimidation. It's about internal control. It's about consistency. It's about knowing who you are when no one is watching. And if someone mistakes calm strength for weakness, that says more about what they're used to than what I am. She said I wasn't man enough, but I am man enough to walk away instead of yelling, stay calm instead of escalating, express how I feel instead of suppressing it, choose growth instead of ego, and that's the kind of man I'll stay, because the right woman won't need me to prove my masculinity. She'll feel secure in it, and I'd rather be steady and misunderstood than loud and respected for something I'm not. If being man enough means losing emotional depth, then I'll pass. Because real strength doesn't shout, it stands. She said she needed space, and I believed her, because when someone says that, you don't question it, you respect it, you tell yourself they're overwhelmed, they're figuring things out, they just need time to clear their head. So I gave her that. I didn't chase, I didn't pressure her, I didn't try to force conversations that she clearly wasn't ready to have. I stepped back, because in my head, that's what you do when you care about someone. You don't make things harder for them, you give them room. But what I didn't realize at the time was this: she didn't need space, she just didn't want me. At first I handled it the way you're supposed to. I gave her distance, I stopped texting first, I stopped trying to keep conversations alive, I let the silence sit even when it didn't feel right, because I thought space meant something temporary, like a pause, like something we would come back from. But the silence started stretching longer than it should have, and instead of clarity, it just created confusion, because when someone genuinely needs space, they don't disappear without direction. They don't leave you guessing. They don't make you feel like you're suddenly a stranger. But that's exactly how it started to feel. And deep down, something didn't sit right. Not because I didn't trust her, but because the energy didn't match what she said. Then little things started adding up. Things I didn't notice right away. But once I did, I couldn't ignore them. She wasn't just taking space. She was still active, still talking, still posting, still present, just not with me. And that's when the confusion turned into something else, clarity, because space doesn't mean disappearing from one person while still being available for everything else. Space doesn't look like selective silence, and that's when it hit me. She didn't need space from everything, she needed space from me. That realization is different, because now it's not about understanding, it's about acceptance. You start replaying everything, trying to figure out when it changed, when her energy shifted, when the connection stopped being something she wanted to maintain. Because if it was really about space, she would have come back, she would have explained, she would have made it clear where things stood, but she didn't. She just faded and let the silence say what she didn't want to say directly. And the truth is, space is one of the easiest ways to leave without saying you're leaving. It sounds soft, it sounds understandable, it doesn't create conflict, but sometimes it's just distance in disguise, a way to slowly step out without having to take responsibility for ending it. And I didn't want to see it like that at first, because believing her felt easier than accepting what was actually happening. Because if I accepted it, then I had to admit something I wasn't ready for, that I wasn't someone she was trying to hold on to. I was someone she was slowly letting go of. And that's a different kind of pain, because it's quiet. There's no argument, no clear ending, just distance that keeps growing until you finally understand what it means. For a while I kept thinking she'd come back, that once she had her space, things would go back to how they were, because when something feels real, you don't expect it to end like that. You expect a conversation, closure, something, but sometimes the absence is the answer, and that's what I had to learn the hard way. And once I stopped waiting, everything started making more sense, because I wasn't confused anymore, I wasn't questioning where I stood, I wasn't trying to interpret silence, I just saw it for what it was. She didn't need time, she made a decision, just not one she wanted to say out loud. And yeah, that hurts, not just because she left, but because of how she did it. Because honesty would have been easier to respect, clarity would have been easier to accept, but instead, I was left trying to understand something that was never explained, and that kind of ending stays with you for a while. So yeah, she said she needed space, but what she really needed was distance from me, and now I understand something clearly. The right person doesn't disappear to figure out if they want you. They don't leave you in silence, they don't make you question everything. They communicate, they stay, they choose. So next time, I won't confuse silence with patience. I won't wait around for someone who already stepped away, because when someone truly wants you, they don't need space to decide it. I don't care how corny it sounds. I'm not going to stop being a lover, not until I get the kind of love I've always imagined. The kind where there's no confusion, no wandering attention, no half-interest disguised as effort, just one person, and a world that feels smaller because of it. I want love where focus doesn't drift, where nobody else even registers, where loving them feels instinctive, not forced. The kind of love that doesn't try to be cinematic, it just is. Two people driving with no destination, standing in open fields, traveling for no reason other than wanting to be together. The kind of love you don't just feel in your chest, you feel it in your soul, hot, intense, alive. And I don't understand how people walk around pretending that kind of love doesn't matter. Like love is casual, like attachment is embarrassing, like caring deeply is something you should hide, because love is everything. It's sharing the world with someone, learning their habits, reading their moods, knowing them in ways no one else does. It's going from stranger to someone you can't imagine life without. And yeah, love comes with risk, heartbreak, loss, pain, but I'm here for all of it. Because if that's the price of loving deeply, I'll pay it. I'll take the uncertainty, I'll take the scars, I'll take the ache that comes with caring. What makes it hard sometimes isn't loving deeply, it's loving deeply in a world that pretends not to care. People act like being attached is weak, like wanting someone fully is desperate. They call it being nonchalant. They call it cool. They call it protecting yourself, but to me it just feels empty. I don't want love that's casual. I don't want half interest. I don't want to pretend I wouldn't be devastated if I lost someone I truly cared about. I want to feel it, all of it. I want the kind of love where my heart is completely in, no exits, no backups, no pretending. And yeah, that makes me vulnerable. It means I get hurt easier. It means I feel things more intensely, but I'd rather feel everything than live numb just to look unbothered. Because loving deeply isn't weakness, it's courage. It takes guts to say, I want you fully. I'm choosing you. I'm not scared to care. And maybe that's why it feels lonely sometimes, because not everyone is built to love like that. Some people close their hearts after pain. Others keep theirs open, not because they're naive, but because they refuse to let disappointment turn them cold. You don't love deeply because it's easy. You love deeply because it's who you are, and even when it costs you, you'd still rather feel everything than live a life that feels hollow. You already know how this can end. You know love can break you. You know it can leave scars. You know it can take pieces you don't get back, and still, you choose it. Not because you're reckless, not because you're desperate, but because a life without love feels smaller than a life with heartbreak. You're not chasing perfection, you're chasing connection. The kind that makes ordinary moments feel alive, the kind that makes the world feel louder and quieter at the same time. And once you've felt even a glimpse of that, you can't pretend you don't want it anymore. So yeah, you risk it again, you open your heart again, you believe again. Not because you forgot the pain, but because you decided it wasn't stronger than your capacity to love. Being a lover boy doesn't mean you ignore reality. It means you face it and still choose love anyway. You're not asking for perfection, you're asking for presence, for a love that feels mutual, chosen, clear. And wanting that doesn't make you unrealistic, it makes you honest. Because once you know how deeply you can love, you stop settling for anything that asks you to dim that fire. So, no, the lover boy in you isn't dying, he's just waiting. And when the right love finally arrives, he'll be ready. What people don't realize is how much strength it takes to stay soft in a world that rewards detachment. It's easier to act unbothered, easier to keep things light, easier to pretend you don't care that much, but you were never built that way. You don't love halfway, you don't feel quietly. When you care, it shows in your effort, in your loyalty, and how present you are. And that's exactly what people try to shame out of you. They tell you you're too much, too attached, too intense. Like love is something you're supposed to ration. So sometimes you wonder if you should change, if caring less would protect you, if closing off would finally make things easier. But every time you try, it feels wrong, because pretending not to care cost you more than heartbreak ever did. You don't want to love where you're constantly monitoring yourself, where you have to downplay your feelings to seem cool. You want to love where effort isn't embarrassing, where loyalty isn't laughed at, where wanting someone fully isn't treated like a flaw. And yes, that kind of love is rare, not because it doesn't exist, but because not everyone has the capacity for it. Some people love with caution, some love with conditions, some love with one foot out the door. You love with your whole chest, and that means when it ends, it hurts differently. You don't just lose a person, you lose the future you already pictured, the version of yourself that only existed with them. But even after that pain, you don't harden, you don't turn cold, you don't become bitter, you grieve, and then you stay open. Not because you're naive, but because you understand something others don't. Love isn't dangerous, avoidance is. A life spent protecting yourself from ever being hurt is a life spent never being fully alive. So you keep choosing love, even when it costs you, even when it scares you. Because being a lover was never about guarantees, it was about courage. And no matter how many times the world tells you to be smaller, to care less, to guard your heart, you don't. Because the lover boy in you knows one truth: a heart that can love deeply is never something to be ashamed of. People who love like you often feel out of place, not because there's something wrong with them, but because the world isn't built for hearts that don't know how to love halfway. You walk into spaces where everyone is guarding themselves, where effort is calculated, where caring too much is treated like a mistake you should have learned from by now. And you can feel it, the hesitation, the emotional distance, the way people keep one foot out the door just in case. Meanwhile, you're standing there ready to choose someone fully if they'd just meet you halfway. That contrast can feel isolating. You start wondering if you're outdated, if your way of loving belongs to another time, another kind of world, because it feels like everyone else is playing it safe while you're still willing to risk your heart, and that makes you stand out. Not loudly, but deeply. You don't bond casually, you don't talk just to fill silence. When you connect, you notice things others miss. You remember details people forget. You show up in ways that don't disappear easily. And that kind of presence can be uncomfortable for people who aren't ready to be seen that closely. So they pull back, they joke about you caring too much. They call your intensity a lot, not because it is, but because they don't know how to match it. That's the part that hurts, realizing you're not too much, you're just too deep for people who only know how to skim the surface. You don't want love that feels convenient, you want love that feels intentional. You don't want someone who chooses you when it's easy. You want someone who chooses you because they mean it. And yeah, that narrows the field. It means you'll feel alone sometimes. It means you'll walk away more than you stay. It means you won't fit everywhere. But fitting everywhere was never the goal. The longing was. The lover boy in you isn't broken because he doesn't blend in. He just hasn't found the place where his kind of love is spoken fluently. And when he does, it won't feel like standing out anymore. It'll feel like coming home. Loving this deeply almost always comes with loneliness first. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because alignment takes time. When you love with your whole heart, you don't rush into anything just to feel chosen. You don't settle for attention that fades. You don't accept half presence just to avoid being alone. And that means there are stretches where it feels like everyone else has someone and you don't. You watch people pair up quickly, jump from connection to connection, call it love because it fills the space, and sometimes you wonder if you're being too patient, too selective, too unwilling to compromise. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of being half-loved. You don't want a relationship that feels like constant self-editing, where you have to mute your feelings, where your intensity is treated like a problem instead of a gift. So you wait, not passively, intentionally. You keep your heart open, but your standards intact. And that's the lonely part no one talks about. Choosing alignment over company, choosing depth over distraction, choosing to sit with the emptiness rather than fill it with something that won't last. Some nights it feels heavy. You question whether it's worth it, whether anyone will ever meet you at the level you're willing to love. But then you remember something important. The love you want can't be rushed. It needs two people who aren't scared of closeness, who don't joke about vulnerability, who don't treat commitment like a trap. And until that shows up, being alone is still safer than shrinking yourself. The lover boy in you isn't lonely because he's lacking. He's lonely because he's waiting for something real. And real love doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives aligned. The lover boy gets misunderstood a lot. People look at the way you love and assume it comes from neediness, from insecurity, from not knowing how to be alone. But that's never been true. You don't love deeply because you're afraid of being by yourself. You love deeply because you know how to be alone and still choose connection. There's a difference. You're not reaching for someone to fill a void. You're reaching because you want to share a life you already know how to carry on your own. But in a world obsessed with detachment, depth gets mislabeled, caring becomes too much, consistency becomes clingy, wanting clarity becomes pressure, so people tell you to chill, to play it cool, to act like you don't care as much as you do. And for a while you try. You soften your words, you hold back your feelings, you pretend you're less invested than your heart actually is. But it never feels right. Because loving quietly when you feel loudly starts to feel like lying to yourself. You don't want to be mysterious. You don't want to be distant. You don't want to be someone who treats love like a game of leverage. You want honesty. You want effort that isn't embarrassing. Commitment that isn't mocked. Connection that doesn't require you to minimize who you are. And the truth is, people who can't handle that were never going to meet you where you stand anyway. They confuse emotional availability with weakness because they've never felt safe enough to offer it themselves. So they pull away, they joke, they keep things light, not because you're too much, but because your depth asks them to be real. and not everyone is ready for that. The lover boy isn't misunderstood because he loves wrong. He's misunderstood because he loves honestly in a world that prefers control. And one day, someone won't ask you to tone it down. They won't call your care extra. They won't flinch at your intensity. They'll recognize it because they've been looking for someone who loves like you, without fear, without games, without holding back. One thing people get wrong about you is thinking you lose yourself in love, that you disappear, that you abandon who you are, just keep someone close. But that's not what loving deeply means to you. You don't give your heart away blindly. You give it intentionally. You're aware of the risk. You feel the fear. You know exactly how much it can hurt, and you still choose to love, not because you don't value yourself, but because you refuse to live guarded out of fear. There's a difference between protecting your heart and closing it. Closing it is pretending you don't care. Protecting it is knowing when to walk away without turning cold. And that's something you had to learn the hard way. You've loved people who couldn't meet you emotionally, who enjoyed your warmth but never offered shelter in return. And each time you didn't lose your softness, you refined it. You learned to notice effort, to listen to consistency, to believe actions more than potential. You learned that loving deeply doesn't mean tolerating confusion. It doesn't mean waiting forever. It doesn't mean accepting less than what you give. So now you love with boundaries, not walls, boundaries. You stay open, but you don't stay where you feel unseen. You express yourself, but you don't beg to be understood. You give fully, but only where there's room for you. That's growth. The lover boy in you didn't harden, he matured. He learned that protecting his heart doesn't mean dimming his light. It means choosing spaces where that light is welcomed. And that's why when you love again, it won't consume you. It'll expand you, because this time you won't confuse intensity with imbalance. You'll recognize the difference between passion and peace. At some point, you stop mistaking chaos for passion. You stop thinking intensity means confusion. You stop believing love has to feel unstable to feel real. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes after loving people who kept you guessing, after giving effort that wasn't matched, after realizing how tired you were from loving alone in a two-person connection. Because for a long time, you thought love was supposed to feel urgent, heavy, like something you had to fight for. But real reciprocity feels different. It doesn't spike your anxiety. It doesn't make you question your place. It doesn't leave you replaying conversations or wondering if you asked for too much. Mutual love feels calm, not boring, steady. It feels like someone meeting your effort without keeping score, like someone choosing you without needing to be convinced. And at first, that kind of love almost feels unfamiliar, because you're used to proving yourself, used to earning attention, used to being the one who cares more. So when someone shows up consistently, communicates clearly, and doesn't flinch at your depth, your body has to unlearn the chaos. You have to remind yourself that peace doesn't mean lack of passion. It means safety. You don't feel smaller around them. You don't feel like you're too much. You don't feel like you need to dim anything. Your intensity doesn't scare them. It reassures them. And that's when it clicks. Love was never supposed to feel like survival. It was supposed to feel like partnership. The lover boy doesn't stop loving deeply. He just stops loving unevenly. He stops pouring into places that don't pour back. He stops calling inconsistency timing, stops calling confusion chemistry, stops calling bare minimum effort. Because once you've tasted reciprocity, you can't go back. You can't unfeel what it's like to be met where you stand. And that's when loving deeply finally feels light. Loving deeply doesn't disappear. It just becomes selective. After everything you've felt, everything you've learned, you don't stop wanting connection. You stop giving it away too easily. You don't rush anymore. Not because you're guarded, but because you understand your capacity. You know how much you give, how present you are, how deeply you attach, and you're careful about where that kind of love lands, that doesn't mean you're closed off. It means you're intentional. You don't entertain mixed signals. You don't romanticize inconsistency. You don't chase potential while ignoring reality. You pay attention now to effort, to follow through, to how someone shows up when things are calm, not just when things are exciting. Because you've learned that real love isn't proven in intensity alone. It's proven in consistency, and the people who are right for you won't be intimidated by that. They won't feel pressured by your depth. They won't joke about you caring too much. They won't need you to shrink to make them comfortable. They'll respect the way you love because they love the same way. That's the shift. You're not asking for more than before. You're just no longer accepting less. You still want closeness, still want loyalty, still want that kind of connection where the world feels quieter because someone chose you fully. But now you're patient with people, not with uncertainty. You're open to love, not to confusion. And that's how the lover boy grows. Not into someone colder, but into someone clearer. Someone who knows that loving deeply isn't about giving your heart to everyone who shows interest. It's about giving it to someone who knows how to hold it. Before the right love shows up, the lover boy is usually alone for a while. Not because he can't find connection, but because he refuses to force it. He's learned what happens when you fill space just to avoid loneliness, how quickly comfort turns into compromise, how easy it is to lose yourself when you accept something that doesn't fully meet you. So he chooses solitude instead, and solitude teaches him things love never could. It shows him who he is without anyone else's expectations, without adjusting his emotions, without holding back his intensity to make someone stay. He learns how to sit with himself, how to enjoy quiet, how to be fulfilled without external validation. And that's important, because when you know how to be alone, you stop accepting love that feels like abandonment in disguise. During this time, he doesn't become detached, he becomes clear about what drains him, clear about what feels safe, clear about the kind of love that actually aligns with who he is. He stops craving attention, stops mistaking chemistry for compatibility, stops confusing being wanted with being understood. And yes, some days are heavy. He still wants connection, still imagines sharing moments with someone, still feels that pull toward closeness. But the difference now is that he won't trade his peace for proximity. He knows the right love won't require him to chase, won't ask him to question his worth, won't make him feel like he has to earn care. So he waits, not anxiously, not desperately, but confidently, because he understands something now. Being alone isn't a punishment. It's preparation. It's a space where he becomes exactly the version of himself the right love will recognize immediately. And when that love finally arrives, it won't feel like relief. It'll feel familiar. The lover boy was never naive. He knew what love could cost him. He knew how deeply it could hurt. He knew it could break him, leave marks he'd carry for years, and he chose it anyway. Not because he didn't understand the risk, but because a life without love felt smaller than a life with scars. For a long time, he thought loving this way was a flaw, something he'd eventually outgrow, something pain was supposed to cure, but it never did. Every heartbreak slowed him down, made him more careful, more aware, but it never killed that part of him that wanted connection, because loving it deeply was never a phase. It was part of his design. He wasn't meant to love casually. He wasn't built for half interest or emotional distance. He was built to choose one person and mean it. That's why it hurt more. That's why waiting felt heavier. That's why walking away took courage. But all of it shaped him. It taught him boundaries without bitterness, standards without arrogance, patience without self-abandonment. So now, when he looks back, he doesn't regret loving the way he did. He doesn't regret caring too much. He doesn't regret believing. He doesn't regret wanting something rare, because one day someone will meet him in that same place. They won't flinch at his intensity. They won't joke about his softness. They won't treat his loyalty like it's replaceable. They'll recognize it. And when that happens, everything will feel different. No anxiety, no confusion, no wondering where he stands, just clarity, effort that feels mutual, love that feels chosen, connection that doesn't require him to dim anything. And suddenly, all the waiting makes sense. Not because it was easy, Dios, but because it protected him from settling for less than he was capable of giving. So no, the lover boy doesn't die, he doesn't disappear, he doesn't harden into someone unrecognizable. He just learns who deserves him, and when the right love finally arrives, he won't have to prove anything. He'll simply be met, and that's all he ever wanted. Leave her alone, bro. Not because you stopped caring, but because you cared longer than you should have. You gave her chances when she gave you confusion. You gave her patience when she gave you mixed signals. You showed up consistently while she showed up only when it was convenient. And the hardest part to admit isn't that she didn't choose you, it's that you kept choosing her even when she made it clear you weren't a priority. You stayed solid, you stayed available, you stayed hoping one day she'd wake up and finally see you the way you saw her, hoping one day she'd match your effort, your energy, your care, but she didn't, not because you weren't enough, but because she was comfortable. She liked knowing you were there, she liked the attention, the validation, the way you made her feel wanted, but she never wanted to give that same certainty back. You weren't her first choice, you were her safety net, her backup plan, her just in case. And staying in that position slowly destroys you. You start questioning yourself, start wondering if you're asking for too much, start lowering your standards just to keep her around. You tell yourself, maybe she's just busy, maybe she's scared, maybe if I'm more patient she'll change. But deep down you know the truth. Someone who truly wants you won't make you feel like you're fighting for their attention. They won't leave you guessing where you stand. They won't only show up when it benefits them. So leave her alone, not out of anger, not out of ego, not to prove a point. Leave her alone out of respect for yourself, because the moment you stop texting first, stop checking her stories, stop replaying conversations in your head, stop making excuses for her absence, you'll feel it, that quiet, that peace, and it'll feel unfamiliar at first because you've been living in chaos for so long you forgot what calm feels like. But that peace is real. It's the peace of no longer forcing something that was never meant to be mutual. The peace of choosing yourself after constantly choosing someone who wouldn't choose you back. She had her chance, she saw your heart, she saw your effort, she saw what you were willing to give, and if she didn't value you then, don't give her another opportunity to waste you again, because the right person won't need convincing. And the moment you truly let her go, you make room for someone who won't treat your love like an option. Choose yourself now. Walking away doesn't feel strong at first. It feels like withdrawal, like your chest is empty and heavy at the same time, like you're doing the one thing your heart keeps begging you not to do, because even when someone isn't good for you, your attachment doesn't just shut off. You still think about her when your phone lights up, still wonder if she noticed your silence, still catch yourself hoping she'll reach out just so you can feel chosen one last time. That's the part nobody talks about. Leaving someone you loved feels like betraying your own feelings. You start asking yourself if you gave up too soon, if maybe this time would have been different, if maybe you should have tried just a little harder. But here's the truth you keep avoiding. You already tried harder than she ever did. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. Someone who truly values you won't require you to disappear to be noticed. They won't need distance to realize your worth. They won't only miss you once you finally stop showing up. And yeah, she might notice now. She might text later. She might suddenly act interested once she feels you slipping away. But don't confuse curiosity with commitment. People hate losing access. They hate losing control. They hate realizing the person they took for granted finally chose themselves. That doesn't mean she changed, just means she felt the shift. And if you go back now, you'll teach her the same lesson again, that she can give you the bare minimum and still keep you around. Leaving is not about punishing her, it's about protecting you. It's about choosing sleep over stress, peace over potential, consistency over confusion. You're not cold for walking away, you're not heartless for setting a boundary, you're not weak for needing more than uncertainty, you're human, and you deserve a love that doesn't make you feel like you're slowly disappearing just to keep someone comfortable. Walking away hurts, but staying where you're not valued hurts longer, and one day, when the noise finally fades, you'll realize you didn't lose her. You found yourself again. Leaving her alone doesn't mean the feelings disappear. It means you finally stop letting those feelings control you. Because the hardest part isn't cutting contact. It's sitting with the silence afterward. It's waking up and realizing there's no good morning text to send, no story to check, no excuse to reach out, just to see how she's doing. Your brain will try to trick you. It'll replay the good moments, the laughs, the nights where it felt real. It'll tell you that maybe you imagined the distance, maybe you were asking for too much, maybe if you just explained yourself better she would have stayed, but you already explained yourself through effort, through patience, through showing up when it wasn't convenient. Love doesn't need translation. If she wanted to choose you, she wouldn't have kept you guessing. She wouldn't have made you feel like your presence was optional. She wouldn't have treated your consistency like something she could always come back to later. You weren't confusing. You were clear. She just wasn't committed. And yeah, it hurts realizing that the person you'd fight for wouldn't even fight for clarity with you. That's when you have to stop romanticizing the potential and start respecting the reality. Reality is this: you were giving girlfriend level energy to someone who kept you at arm's length. You were loyal to someone who wasn't sure she wanted you at all. Walking away feels unnatural because you're not used to choosing yourself first. You're used to being patient, understanding, giving people time to figure you out while you slowly lose pieces of yourself in the process. But love isn't supposed to cost you your peace. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop waiting for her to finally get it, you reclaim your power. And that scares people who benefited from you staying small. You didn't lose her. You outgrew the version of yourself that was willing to accept half love, and this is only the beginning. And the truth you don't want to admit yet is that leaving her alone feels like you're losing something. Not because she was right for you, but because she became familiar. You got used to waiting, used to hoping, used to reading into crumbs like they were signs. You trained your nervous system to find comfort in inconsistency. So when you finally step back, your body panics before your mind understands. You'll feel restless. You'll feel tempted to break your own boundary. You'll pick up your phone for no reason, scroll, close the app, open it again, just to see if maybe this time she noticed you're gone. And that urge doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're detoxing from someone who kept you emotionally hungry. Because when someone keeps you half-fed, you start confusing starvation with love. You tell yourself, maybe she just didn't know how much I cared. Maybe if I stayed a little longer, maybe I gave up too soon. But you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you cared too much to keep abandoning yourself. You stayed long enough to know the pattern, the delayed replies, the empty apologies, the promises that never turned into action. You stayed long enough to realize that if someone wanted to show up for you, you wouldn't have to convince them. And deep down, you know that. That's why the silence hits different now. It's not empty, it's honest. For the first time, you're not waiting for her mood to decide your worth. You're not shrinking yourself to stay chosen. You're not wondering if today's the day she finally treats you right. And yeah, it hurts. Because healing doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels lonely. But loneliness with self-respect will always be quieter than love that keeps you anxious. One day you'll look back and realize leaving her alone was the moment everything started changing. Not because she came back, but because you finally came back to yourself. At some point, you have to ask yourself a hard question. How long are you willing to wait for someone to finally treat you right? Not because they're evil, not because they're a bad person, but because they keep showing you over and over that you're not a priority. And the scary part, you already know the answer. You've known it for a while. You just didn't want to accept it. Because accepting it means admitting that the future you imagined with them was built more on hope than reality. You weren't in love with what was happening. You were in love with what could have happened if they just showed up the way you needed. So you stayed, you waited, you overextended yourself, you gave patience to someone who gave you uncertainty, you gave loyalty to someone who gave you mixed signals, you gave understanding to someone who never tried to understand you, and every time they pulled away, you blamed yourself. Maybe I'm asking for too much, maybe I'm being dramatic, maybe this is just how love is, but love is not confusion. Love is not constantly guessing where you stand. Love is not feeling anxious every time your phone lights up or doesn't. Love doesn't make you feel replaceable. What really kept you stuck wasn't them. It was the version of you that believed walking away meant you failed, but leaving doesn't mean you lost. It means you finally stopped losing yourself, because staying with someone who makes you feel unwanted slowly erodes your confidence in ways you don't notice at first. You stop speaking up. You stop expecting effort. You start accepting bare minimum behavior and calling it maturity. You start shrinking your needs so you don't scare them away, and that's when love stops being love and starts becoming survival. You You don't need to be less to be loved. You don't need to be quieter, cooler, easier, more convenient. The right person won't feel overwhelmed by your care. They won't feel annoyed by your presence. They won't treat your love like something disposable. They'll meet you where you are instead of making you feel like you're always asking for too much. And yeah, choosing yourself feels lonely at first because you're breaking a habit. You're breaking the habit of chasing, the habit of waiting, the habit of hoping someone will finally choose you. But peace doesn't arrive loud. It arrives quietly. In the moments you stop checking your phone, stop explaining yourself, stop wondering why you weren't enough. One day you'll realize you don't miss them. You miss who you were before you started doubting your worth, and that version of you, they're still there. You didn't lose love, you protected it. You didn't walk away from something good. You walked away from something that was slowly breaking you. And that's not weakness, that's growth. And what nobody tells you is that once you finally stop chasing them, that's when everything gets quiet. Not empty quiet, honest quiet. No more checking your phone every 5 minutes. No more replaying conversations in your head, wondering if you said the wrong thing. No more anxiety before hitting send. No more hoping today will be the day they suddenly care more. At first it feels uncomfortable because chaos became familiar, confusion felt normal, and peace feels strange when you're not used to it. You might even miss them for the wrong reasons. Not because they treated you well, but because your nervous system got addicted to inconsistency. You got used to highs and lows, to feeling chosen one day and invisible the next, to chasing validation instead of receiving love. That kind of pattern messes with your head. It makes you mistake emotional stress for passion. It makes stability feel boring and uncertainty feel exciting. But real love doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't disappear when things get inconvenient. It doesn't require you to earn basic respect. Real love feels safe. Not dull, not dramatic, safe. And when you finally step away, you start noticing things you ignored before. How drained you were, how much energy you poured into someone who barely poured back, how often you made excuses for behavior that hurt you. You start realizing how much love you actually have to give, how deeply you care, how loyal you are when you choose someone. And instead of feeling ashamed of that, you begin to see it as strength, because one day, someone will meet that energy without hesitation. They won't flinch when you care deeply. They won't pull away when things get real. They won't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by being yourself. They'll choose you without you having to beg. They'll show up without being reminded. They'll make you feel wanted without confusion. And when that happens, you'll look back at the version of you who stayed too long, and you won't feel regret. You'll feel proud that you learned, proud that you walked away, proud that you chose peace over potential, because letting go wasn't the end of your story. It was the moment you finally made space for something better. At some point, you have to accept a hard truth. If they wanted to show up, they would have. If they cared the way you cared, you wouldn't be confused. You wouldn't be questioning where you stand. You wouldn't be asking strangers for advice just to understand their silence. Love isn't subtle. Effort isn't hidden. Interest doesn't need decoding. When someone wants you in their life, they make space, not excuses, not delays, not half responses at midnight when they're bored. And the reason it hurts so much to accept this is because you invested emotionally before you were ever chosen properly. You imagined futures, you pictured moments that never actually happened. You fell in love with potential instead of reality. That's not weakness, that's hope. But hope becomes dangerous when it keeps you stuck, when it convinces you to stay loyal to someone who treats you like an option, when it makes you believe that patience will eventually turn into priority. It won't. People don't suddenly wake up and value you after months of showing you they don't. They don't magically learn how to love you correctly once they realize you'll stay no matter what. If anything, they learn they don't have to try. And that's why walking away feels so heavy, because you're not just letting go of them. You're letting go of the version of the future you created in your head. You're grieving something that never fully existed. That kind of loss is real. You'll miss the idea of them more than the person. You'll miss what you hoped they'd become, not what they actually showed you. And that's okay. Healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't matter. It means being honest about why it did and still choosing yourself anyway. You don't need closure from someone who couldn't communicate. You don't need answers from someone who avoided accountability. Their behavior already told you everything. Silence is an answer. Distance is a decision. Inconsistency is a choice. And once you stop chasing clarity from people who benefit from your confusion, you start reclaiming your power. You stop over-explaining. You stop proving your worth. You stop shrinking yourself to fit someone else's comfort. You realize you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And when that finally sinks in, you don't become bitter, you become selective. You start protecting your heart the same way you used to give it away. You start choosing peace over chaos, consistency over excitement, respect over attachment. Let them go, not because they're a bad person, but because they weren't your person. And the moment you truly accept that is the moment your life starts opening up in ways you couldn't see before. And the craziest part is, once you stop chasing them, you start noticing how quiet it gets. Not the painful kind of quiet, but the kind where your nervous system finally gets a break. No more checking your phone every 5 minutes. No more rereading old messages trying to find meaning. No more wondering if today will be the day they suddenly choose you. You realize how much energy you were burning just trying to feel secure with someone who never offered stability. That constant anxiety, that wasn't love. That was your intuition fighting against your attachment. Real love doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't make you feel disposable. It doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to stay connected. And yeah, letting go hurts at first. There's withdrawal. There's nights where you want to reach out, where your fingers hover over their name, where you almost convince yourself to send that one last message. But every time you don't, you build a little more self-respect. You start realizing how much of yourself you gave away to someone who never protected your heart the way you protected theirs. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for presence. You were asking for effort. You were asking to matter. And one day, someone will meet you where you are without you having to beg, explain, or wait. They won't make you feel like you're too much. They won't make you feel like you're replaceable. They won't make you question your value in moments of silence. But you don't get to that person if you keep clinging to the ones who treat you like an option. So let this be the moment you choose differently. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because the version of you that keeps chasing people who don't choose you deserves rest. And the version of you that finally walks away is the one that makes room for something real. A lot of people don't talk about how hard it is to walk away from someone you still care about, not because you don't see the red flags, but because you remember the good moments too clearly. You remember who they were in the beginning, the version of them that felt safe, the version that made you feel wanted, chosen, important, and you keep hoping that version will come back. That's what keeps you stuck. Not love, hope. Hope that if you wait a little longer, if you explain yourself one more time, if you give just a bit more patience, they'll finally show up the way you need them to. But hope can be dangerous when it's attached to someone who keeps proving they're not willing or ready to meet you halfway. Because every time you ignore their actions and listen to their potential instead, you teach yourself that your needs are negotiable. You start accepting inconsistency as normal, mixed signals as effort, bare minimum as love, and slowly, you stop recognizing yourself. You become quieter, more anxious, more forgiving than you should be. You start blaming yourself for their lack of effort. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just how relationships are. But deep down, you know the truth. Love isn't supposed to feel like constant confusion. It isn't supposed to drain you more than it fills you. And it definitely isn't supposed to make you feel alone while you're still technically with someone. That's when you have to be honest with yourself. Not about how much you love them, but about how much staying is costing you. Because loving someone shouldn't mean losing yourself in the process. And what hurts the most is realizing that you were willing to do the hard things for someone who wouldn't even do the simple ones. You showed consistency, they showed convenience, you communicated your feelings, they avoided uncomfortable conversations, you stayed when things got messy, they pulled away the moment effort was required, and yet you still questioned yourself, you still wondered if you were the problem, if you were asking for too much, if you were expecting love the wrong way. But love isn't complicated like that. People make time for what matters to them. They protect what they value. They don't leave you guessing where you stand. The truth is, some people don't lose you because they don't care. They lose you because they never learned how to care properly. They want connection without responsibility, attention without commitment, love without effort. And you can't teach someone how to show up if they don't want to. That's why leaving isn't weakness. It's self-respect finally getting louder than attachment. It's choosing peace over potential, reality over hope, self-worth over familiar pain. Walking away doesn't mean what you felt wasn't real. It means you finally decided that you are real too. And one day you'll look back and realize that the moment you stopped chasing was the moment your life got quieter, lighter, clearer. Because the right person won't make you feel like love is something you have to earn. They'll choose you without being convinced. You stayed longer than you should have because you believed in what could be, not what actually was. You kept replaying the good moments, convincing yourself they meant more than the silence, the distance, the excuses. You ignored the way your chest felt heavy every time you waited for a reply. lie. You ignored how drained you felt after giving everything and receiving the bare minimum. That wasn't love making you tired. That was imbalance. Real love doesn't leave you anxious. It doesn't make you feel disposable. It doesn't turn your patience into pain. And the hardest truth to accept is that some people are comfortable letting you overextend as long as it benefits them. They don't stop you. They don't reassure you. They just take until one day you finally stop giving. And when you do, they feel it. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the access. That's when they reach out. That's when they suddenly care. That's when confusion turns into regret. But by then, you've already changed. You're no longer begging to be chosen. You're no longer shrinking to fit someone else's emotional limits. You're choosing yourself the way you always wished they would choose you. And that choice, that's where your healing actually starts. At some point, you stop missing them and start missing who you were before you questioned your worth for them, before you reread messages trying to find meaning that wasn't there, before you blamed yourself for someone else's lack of effort. That's when it really hits you. You didn't lose them. You lost yourself trying to keep them. You became quieter. You thought twice before speaking. You downplayed your needs so you wouldn't seem like too much. And the crazy part is they never asked you to do that. You did it because you cared. You did it because you were afraid that being fully you would push them away. But love that only survives when you make yourself smaller was never meant to last. Real love doesn't need you to perform. It doesn't need you to chase. It doesn't make you feel replaceable the moment you stop overgiving. And once you understand that, you stop romanticizing the bare minimum. You stop calling inconsistency mystery. You stop calling neglect space. You stop calling emotional distance busy. You see it for what it really was. Someone enjoying your presence without respecting your heart. That realization hurts, but it also frees you, because now you know you're not asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And the next time someone comes along, you won't beg them to stay. You'll watch how they show up. You'll notice how they choose you without being asked, and if they don't, you'll walk away sooner. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. And there comes a point where the pain shifts. It's no longer about missing them. It's about realizing how much of yourself you gave away just to keep them comfortable. You start remembering moments where you stayed quiet even though something hurt. Moments where you said, "It's fine," when it really wasn't. Moments where you lowered your standards because you didn't want to seem demanding. You replay conversations in your head and notice how often you explained yourself, how often you justified their behavior, how often you made excuses for why they couldn't show up the way you needed, and that's when it finally clicks. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to do what they were never willing to do. You weren't needy. You were neglected. You weren't overthinking. You were being given mixed signals. You weren't insecure. You were emotionally starved. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You realize how exhausting it was to love someone who only showed up halfway, how draining it was to constantly wonder where you stood with them, how heavy it felt to care more than you were cared for. That kind of love doesn't make you feel safe. It keeps you anxious. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you stuck in a cycle of hoping they'll change while slowly losing yourself. And the saddest part, they benefited from your patience, from your loyalty, from your willingness to stay even when it hurt. You don't get rewarded for suffering in silence. You don't get love by proving how much pain you can tolerate. Love is supposed to feel steady. It's supposed to feel mutual. It's supposed to feel like effort is being met with effort, not excuses. So choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's deciding that you won't keep pouring into someone who leaves you empty. It's realizing that peace feels better than chasing potential that never becomes real. And when you finally choose yourself, you don't become cold. You become clear. Clear about what you deserve. Clear about what you won't accept again. Clear about the fact that the right person won't make you question your value in the first place. After you choose yourself, something strange happens. The noise quiets down. Your phone feels lighter. Chest doesn't feel so tight all the time. You stop waking up with that anxious feeling, wondering if today will be the day they finally show up for you or disappoint you again. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes. Stop rereading old messages. Stop trying to decode tone, timing, silence, because you finally understand that love was never supposed to feel like a puzzle. And that's when you realize how much energy you were wasting on someone who was unsure about you while you were sure about them. You were loving from a place of hope. They were loving from a place of convenience. You wanted depth. They wanted access. You wanted consistency. They wanted control without responsibility. And once you step back, you see how one-sided it really was. You notice how you were always the one adjusting, always the one compromising, always the one reaching out first, always the one trying to keep things alive. That's not love. That's survival mode. Real love doesn't make you feel disposable. Doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just for wanting basic respect. And here's the hardest truth to accept. Potential means nothing without effort. You weren't in love with who they were. You were in love with who they could be, the version of them that only existed in your head. But you can't build a future with someone's maybe. You can't heal by holding on to what ifs. So you stop romanticizing the bare minimum. You stop giving credit for intentions that never turn into action. And slowly, your standards rise back up to where they were always meant to be. You start asking better questions. You start walking away sooner. You stop explaining your worth to people who never planned to value it. And the craziest part, the moment you stop settling, you realize how much you were settling before. You realize you don't miss them. You miss the version of yourself that believed love had to hurt to be real, but it doesn't. Love can be calm. Love can be safe. Love can feel like rest instead of stress. And once you experience that, you'll never beg for confusion again. Leaving her alone doesn't mean you stop caring overnight. Doesn't mean you suddenly forget her laugh, her voice, the way she made things feel alive for a moment. It means you finally accept the truth you've been avoiding. That love without reciprocity will slowly drain you until there's nothing left. You were pouring into someone who never learned how to pour back. And no matter how patient you were, no matter how consistent you stayed, you can't teach someone to value you if they don't want to. You kept telling yourself, maybe she's just going through something. You made excuses for the missed calls, the late replies, the emotional distance. You told yourself love was supposed to be patient, that real men stay, that walking away meant you didn't try hard enough. But here's the part nobody talks about. There's a difference between being patient and being neglected. There's a difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. And you crossed that line without even realizing it. Every time you texted first, every time you ignored your own gut, every time you accepted the bare minimum just to keep her close, you taught yourself that your needs came second. You shrank yourself to fit into a space she barely made room for. And that does something to you. It makes you question your worth. It makes you wonder why loving someone feels like punishment. It makes you think something is wrong with you. And the truth is, you were just loving the wrong person. Leaving her alone is the first time you choose yourself. It's the first time you stop begging for effort and start demanding peace. It's realizing that love isn't supposed to feel like anxiety, confusion, or constant doubt. The right person won't make you question where you stand. They won't make you compete with silence. They won't make you feel disposable. You don't need closure from her. You don't need one last conversation. Her actions already told you everything you needed to know. And as hard as it is, walking away now is what protects the part of you that still believes in real love. Part of you that deserves consistency, reassurance, and effort without having to ask. This isn't about her anymore. It's about you learning that choosing peace is not weakness, it's growth. What hurts the most isn't even losing her. It's realizing how long you stayed when your heart was begging you to leave. It's remembering all the moments you felt small but ignored it because loving her felt bigger than loving yourself. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you hoped, because you saw potential, because you believed that if you loved hard enough, showed up enough, proved yourself enough, things would change. But love doesn't work like that. You can't love someone into choosing you. You can't be consistent enough to make someone consistent back. You can't sacrifice your peace forever and call it love. At some point, staying becomes more painful than leaving, and that's where you are now. You're gonna have nights where you almost text her, nights where your fingers hover over her name, where your mind starts replaying the good memories and conveniently forgets the pain. You'll miss the comfort of what was familiar, even if it wasn't healthy. That doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're human. Healing doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop going back. And slowly, without even realizing it, things will start to change. You'll wake up one day and notice your chest doesn't feel as heavy. You won't check your phone as much. Her name won't be the first thing on your mind when something good or bad happens. You'll start laughing again, not forced, not distracted, but real. You'll start feeling like yourself again. That's when you'll understand why it had to end. Not because she was evil, not because you were unlovable, but because she wasn't capable of meeting you where you stood. And staying would have cost you parts of yourself you can't afford to lose. One day, someone will choose you without hesitation, without confusion, without making you question your worth. And when that happens, you'll look back and realize leaving her alone was the moment your life finally started loving forward. And listen, there's something nobody really prepares you for after you finally walk away. The quiet, not the peaceful kind at first, the kind where there's no chaos, no waiting on replies, no wondering if today will be the day she finally shows up the way you need her to. That silence can feel uncomfortable because you got used to emotional noise, you got used to the highs and lows, the hope, the disappointment, the cycle, and when it's gone, your mind almost panics like it lost something important. But what it really lost was the stress. You're going to question yourself. You'll wonder if you were too harsh, too impatient, too emotional. You'll replay conversations and think, maybe I should have said this differently. Maybe I should have tried one more time. But understand this. If someone truly wanted to stay, they wouldn't have made you feel like you had to beg for effort. You wouldn't have had to over-explain your feelings. You wouldn't have felt like loving them was a constant uphill battle. The version of you that stayed too long did so because he believed in love. And that's not something to be ashamed of, but the version of you now, he's learning discernment. He's learning that love without respect will drain you. That potential means nothing without action. And that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You didn't lose her. You released someone who was blocking the path to someone better, someone who won't confuse consistency with boredom, someone who won't make you feel like an option, someone who won't need reminders of your worth. Right now, it might feel like you're walking alone, but you're not going backwards anymore, and that's everything. And one day, without even realizing it, you're going to wake up and she won't be the first thought on your mind anymore. Not because you stopped caring overnight, not because what you felt wasn't real, but because you finally gave yourself permission to move forward. The memories won't disappear, but they won't control you either. They'll just be reminders of what you survived, not what you're missing. You'll start to notice how much lighter you feel, how your chest isn't tight every time your phone buzzes, how you're not constantly checking stories, rereading old messages, or wondering why you weren't enough for someone who never knew how to love you properly in the first place. You'll realize how much of yourself you were giving away to someone who kept taking without ever pouring back into you, and that's when it hits you. The problem was never your effort. It was never your heart being too big. It was never you loving too deeply. The problem was that you were offering loyalty to someone who didn't know how to value it. You were offering consistency to someone addicted to convenience. And you were offering real love to someone who only liked the idea of being loved. Walking away wasn't a loss. It was a correction, a reset, a moment where you finally chose peace over potential, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over attachment. That takes strength most people don't have. So don't go back. Not when she gets lonely, not when she suddenly remembers your value, not when she realizes nobody else loved her the way you did, because by then you'll understand something important. Someone who truly wants you won't need to lose you to see your worth. Leave her alone, and finally let yourself be found by someone who won't ever make you question if you matter. No one really talks about how long some men are willing to wait for the one person they truly want. Not days, not weeks, months, sometimes years. And it usually starts with something small, something that doesn't sound final. She says, maybe one day. I'm just not ready right now. I need time. And he hears that like it's a promise, like it means not now doesn't mean never. So he holds on to those words, replays them, builds hope around them, and he waits. He doesn't make it obvious, he doesn't beg, he doesn't pressure. He waits quietly, patiently, convincing everyone, including himself, that he's fine. Because when a man sees you in his future, when he's already chosen you in his heart, waiting feels easier than letting go. He tells himself she's healing. She's figuring things out. She'll come back when she's ready. And sometimes it's hard to tell if that kind of waiting is beautiful or self-destructive, because love like that is rare. A man who's willing to pause his own needs, put his feelings on hold, stay loyal to the idea of you without knowing if you'll ever choose him back. That's not weakness, that's commitment. But commitment without clarity can slowly break someone. So if you have a man like that, someone willing to wait while you sort through your life, you can't treat that lightly. Take the time you need, heal what you need to heal, do what you need to do, but don't let him wait if you already know you're not coming back. Because the cruelest thing is letting someone hold on to hope when all that's waiting for them is disappointment. A lot of men won't walk away. They'll keep telling themselves one more month, one more sign, one more chance, not because they're desperate, but because they care. So if you can love him again, do it fully. And if you can't, tell him, don't make him wait just to slowly lose himself loving someone who was never going to return. What people don't see is what waiting does to him. Not on the outside. He looks fine. He still shows up. Still laughs at the right moments, still pretends he hasn't built his days around the possibility of you coming back. But inside, everything everything is on pause. He doesn't let himself move on, doesn't let himself get close to anyone else, doesn't let himself fully hope or fully let go, because doing either would feel like betraying the future he pictured with you. So he lives in the middle, not chosen, not free, just waiting. He rereads old messages looking for reassurance that maybe he didn't imagine the connection. He remembers how you looked at him, how you laughed with him, how real it felt, and that's what keeps him there. Not obsession, not desperation, memory. He tells himself real love requires patience, that if it's meant to be, it'll come back around. But patience without direction starts turning into quiet pain, because every time you say, "I don't know yet," he hears, "Not now, but maybe," and maybe is enough to keep him holding on. What breaks him isn't waiting itself. It's not knowing whether the waiting means something to you too. He would wait longer if he knew it mattered. He would walk away if he knew it didn't. But uncertainty keeps him stuck, and the longer he stays there, the more of himself he puts on hold. His needs, his timing, his chance to be loved fully, all for someone who may never come back. And that's the part no one talks about. Waiting doesn't just cost time, it costs pieces of him he doesn't realize he's giving away. At some point, the waiting starts asking questions back, not out loud, not in a way he can easily answer, just quiet thoughts that show up late at night when there's nothing left to distract him. Am I being patient, or am I just afraid to let go? Because there's a difference. Patience comes with trust, with direction, with some kind of reassurance that the waiting has meaning, but what he has is uncertainty. He's not waiting because he's calm. He's waiting because walking away would mean admitting that the future he imagined might never happen. And that's harder than staying still, so he tells himself stories. That love is supposed to hurt a little, that timing matters more than readiness, that if he just proves he's loyal enough, consistent enough, understanding enough, it'll all make sense one day. But love isn't supposed to feel like erasing yourself. It isn't supposed to require putting your life on hold indefinitely. It isn't supposed to make you question whether your needs matter at all. Still, he stays. His hope is quiet, but it's persistent. He whispers things like, "She'll come back. She just needs time. It'll be worth it." And as long as that voice exists, letting go feels like failure, like giving up on something real. What scares him most isn't the idea of her choosing someone else. It's the idea that she might never choose anyone, and he still waited anyway. That he might look back one day and realize he sacrificed his own chance to be loved fully for someone who was never coming back. And that realization doesn't make him angry, it makes him tired. Because waiting stopped feeling romantic a long time ago. Now it just feels heavy. And deep down, he's starting to understand something he's been avoiding. Love shouldn't feel like standing still while life passes you by. There comes a moment when waiting stops feeling like love and starts feeling like self-abandonment. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic breaking point. It's quieter than that. The realization that his life has been moving around someone who isn't moving toward him, that he's been planning a future with someone who won't even promise a present. He notices it in small ways, how he avoids making plans because what if she comes back? How he turns down opportunities because he doesn't want to feel unavailable when she finally decides. How he measures his growth, his happiness, his healing against whether or not it would still fit her. And that's when it hits him. Waiting has slowly become a way of disappearing, not because he doesn't love her, but because loving her has started costing him himself. He tells himself love requires sacrifice, but sacrifice isn't supposed to be one-sided. Real love doesn't ask you to pause your entire life without offering anything solid in return. And for the first time, he lets himself ask a dangerous question. If she never comes back, would this still have been worth it? That question hurts because the answer isn't immediate, because a part of him still wants to believe that patience will be rewarded, but another part, the quieter, tired part, knows something has to change. He starts realizing that choosing himself doesn't mean he loved her less. It means he finally loved himself enough to stop waiting in uncertainty. Letting go doesn't erase what they had. It doesn't make the feelings fake. It doesn't turn the waiting into a mistake. It just means he's done confusing hope with a promise, because love shouldn't require you to disappear quietly just to prove you're loyal. And walking away doesn't mean he stopped caring. Sometimes it means he cared enough to stop hurting himself in silence. Letting go hurts differently than waiting ever did. Waiting was familiar, painful but predictable. It gave him something to hold on to, even if that something was uncertainty. Letting go feels like free fall, because when he finally stops waiting, there's no future version of them to lean on anymore. No, maybe one day. No imagined moment where she finally says she's ready. Just silence, and that silence is loud at first. He feels it in the empty spaces where hope used to sit, in the routines he built around the idea of her coming back. For a while he doesn't know who he is without the waiting, because waiting gave his love direction. It gave his patience purpose. It made the pain feel meaningful. Now he has to sit with something harder, grief, not just for her, but for the version of himself who believed love always meant endurance. He realizes how long he ignored his own needs, how often he told himself later, instead of asking for what he deserved now. And that realization stings, because he wasn't weak, he was loyal. He just stayed loyal to someone who couldn't meet him where he stood. Healing doesn't come all at once. Some days he still wonders if he gave up too soon, if one more month would have changed everything. But then he remembers how heavy the waiting felt, how small his world had become, how much of himself he put on hold, and slowly something shifts. He starts choosing himself in quiet ways. He makes plans without hesitation. He opens himself to new moments without checking if they'd interfere with the future that no longer exists. And for the first time in a long time, his life starts moving forward again. Letting go didn't mean he stopped loving her. It meant he stopped abandoning himself. And that's when healing actually began. After the waiting ends, there's a strange emptiness that follows, not because he lost her, but because he lost the version of himself that believed love had to hurt to be real. For a long time, his worth was tied to patience, to loyalty, to how much he was willing to endure without being chosen back. And when that chapter closed, he didn't immediately feel strong. He felt unsure, because when you spend so long putting someone else first, you forget what it feels like to be a priority in your own life. He starts noticing it in small moments, how uncomfortable it feels to ask for what he needs, how he second guesses himself when someone shows interest too easily, because ease feels unfamiliar now. He was used to earning affection, proving commitment, waiting quietly without complaint, so when someone shows up without confusion or hesitation, it almost feels wrong. Like love should require more suffering than this. That's when he realizes how deeply the waiting shaped him. He didn't just pause his life, he learned to minimize himself. He learned that his needs could wait, that his feelings were negotiable, that love meant staying even when nothing was being offered in return. Unlearning that takes time. He has to remind himself that love isn't supposed to feel uncertain, that commitment doesn't mean self-erasure, that being chosen shouldn't feel like a reward for endurance. Slowly he starts rewriting the rules. He lets himself want clarity. He lets himself walk away when something feels one-sided. He stops confusing consistency with compatibility, and piece by piece his sense of worth comes back. Not because someone else validates it, but because he no longer abandons himself to keep someone else comfortable. He waited because he meant it, but now he understands something important. The right person won't need him to suffer quietly to prove his love. They'll meet him where he stands. Waiting leaves marks, not obvious ones. Nothing you can point to and explain easily. But after someone has waited that long, they don't love the same way again. He becomes more careful, not closed off, just aware, because once you've given that much patience to the wrong person, you learn how expensive your loyalty really is. He no longer rushes into hope, no longer builds futures in his head without evidence in the present, not because he's bitter, but because he knows what it costs to believe too soon. He listens differently now. When someone says, "I'm not ready," he hears it clearly. When someone says, "I don't know what I want," he doesn't translate it into possibility. He takes words as they are, not as promises he can grow hope around. That doesn't make him cold, it makes him intentional. He still loves deeply, still commits fully, but only where clarity exists, because waiting taught him that love shouldn't feel like uncertainty stretched over time. He no longer tries to prove his worth through endurance. He doesn't stay where effort isn't mutual. He doesn't confuse potential with reality, and that makes him harder to lose, not because he withholds love, but because he now knows when to walk away. He understands that choosing someone means choosing himself too. That real connection doesn't ask him to pause his life indefinitely. It doesn't ask him to suffer quietly just to stay loyal. Waiting didn't break him, it refined him. It taught him what love isn't, though he could finally recognize what it is. And when he loves again, it won't be out of fear of losing. It will be out of certainty. The next time he loves someone, it won't start with waiting. It'll start with clarity, because once you've waited that long for someone who couldn't meet you halfway, you stop confusing effort with connection. He won't wonder where he stands anymore. He won't analyze pauses, he won't read into silence or turn uncertainty into hope, not because he's less romantic, but because he's learned what love is supposed to feel like. The next person he loves won't have to guess how he feels. They won't have to question his loyalty. They won't have to wonder if he's serious, because when he chooses fully, but this time he'll only stay where he's chosen back. He won't pause his life waiting for someone to decide. He won't put his heart on hold for potential. He understands now that real love doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't stretch uncertainty across months and years. It doesn't ask you to sacrifice peace just to stay connected. The next person will feel the difference. Not because he loves harder, but because he loves cleaner, with boundaries, with honesty, with the expectation of mutual effort. And that's the quiet shift no one sees. Waiting didn't make him bitter, it made him precise. It taught him that commitment means nothing without intention behind it. So when he gives his time again, his patience again, his heart again, it won't be because he's afraid to lose. It'll be because both of them are choosing each other in the present. Not someday, not maybe, now. The people who wait the longest are often the hardest to replace, not because they demand attention, not because they make noise, but because they loved with patience most people don't have anymore. When he was waiting, his presence felt easy to overlook. He was steady, consistent, always there, and consistency can become invisible to people who aren't ready to value it. So they assume he'll always be there, that his patience has no limit, that his loyalty is permanent. But what they don't realize is that waiting teaches restraint. It teaches someone exactly how much they're willing to give before they stop. So when he finally walks away, it's quiet, no drama, no announcement, no attempt to make anyone regret it. He just goes, and that's when the absence is felt, because he wasn't loud, he was grounding. He was the one who remembered, the one who stayed calm, the one who made things feel safe without asking for anything in return. And when that's gone, it leaves a space it's hard to fill, not with excitement, not with attention, but with depth. That's when people realize they didn't lose someone dramatic, they lost someone rare, someone who would have waited longer than anyone else, but chose not to abandon himself anymore. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that he left, but that he learned how to leave. Because once someone like that is gone, they don't come back confused. They don't come back waiting. They move forward with intention. And by the time anyone realizes what they lost, he's already chosen himself. Waiting was never the problem. The problem was waiting without being chosen back. For a long time, he believed love was proven by how much you were willing to endure, how long you could stay, how patient you could be, how quietly you could hurt without asking for reassurance, and he did that. He waited through uncertainty, through mixed signals, through not right now that never turned into I'm ready. not because he didn't value himself, but because he valued love deeply. But eventually he learned the difference between commitment and self-sacrifice. Real love doesn't keep you suspended. It doesn't ask you to pause your life while someone decides if you're worth choosing. Real love meets you where you are, and the moment he understood that, waiting lost its meaning. Because waiting only makes sense when both people are moving toward each other, even slowly, not when one person is standing still hoping to be picked someday. Walking away wasn't easy. It didn't feel empowering at first. It felt like grief. Grief for the future he imagined. Grief for the version of himself who believed patience would be rewarded no matter the cost. But over time, that grief turned into clarity. He realized something simple but life-changing. Love should feel mutual, certain, chosen in the present, not promised someday. So now, when he looks back on the waiting, he doesn't see weakness. He sees proof that he can love deeply. But he also sees the moment he learned to stop giving that depth to people who couldn't return it. He waited because he meant it, but he walked away because he finally understood that the right person won't need him to wait at all. They'll choose him clearly, willingly, and without hesitation, and that's not something you ever have to earn by putting your life on hold. Being a teenager and going through this, it's different, because it's your first time feeling everything this deeply. The first time you stay up late just to talk to someone. The first time your mood depends on a notification. The first time you actually care if someone stays or leaves, and you don't even realize how much it's affecting you at the time. You just think, this is what it's supposed to feel like, so you give everything. Your time, your attention, your energy. Because to you at that age, you don't know how to control how much you feel. Nobody teaches you that. There's no balance, no take it slow. You just go all in without even realizing it. Because when something feels real for the first time, you don't question it. You don't think about protecting yourself. You don't think about what could go wrong. You don't think about whether the other person feels the same way. You just feel it. And you let it take over everything. Your whole day starts revolving around them. You wake up and check your phone first thing. You wait for their message like it actually means something. You reread conversations like there's something hidden in them. And the craziest part? You don't even notice how deep you're getting. It feels normal. It feels like this is just what liking someone is supposed to be. And when they give you attention, it hits different at that age. Because it's not just attention. It's validation. It's the feeling of being chosen. The feeling that out of everyone, they're picking you to talk to laugh with, to spend time on. And when you haven't felt that before, it becomes everything. That's why you start giving more time, more energy, more of yourself. You stay up later than you should just to talk to them. You ignore other things just to keep the conversation going. You make space for them in your life without even realizing how much space you're giving. And in your head, you think it's mutual. You think they feel it the same way you do. Because why wouldn't they? They're replying. They're talking. They're there. So it must mean something, right? But that's the part nobody tells you when you're younger. Just because someone is there doesn't mean they're there the same way you are. And you don't realize that yet. Not until things start changing. And when things start changing, you don't accept it right away. You feel it. But you don't accept it, because at that age, your first instinct isn't to walk away, it's to hold on tighter. You start overthinking everything. Why did they reply slower? Why do they seem different? Did I do something wrong? And instead of pulling back, you lean in. You text more. You try harder to keep the conversation alive. You become more available, more understanding, more patient, because in your head, if something is slipping, you don't let go. You fix it. But what you don't realize is you're the only one trying to fix something. And that's where it starts to hurt. Not all at once, slowly. You start noticing the little things. The way they don't text like they used to. The way conversations feel shorter. The way you're the one carrying most of it now. And it's confusing. Because just a little while ago, everything felt easy. So you keep chasing that version, the version of them that made you feel wanted, the version that stayed up late with you, the version that made it feel like you mattered. And every time they show a little bit of that again, it resets everything. You think, okay, it's back. You think maybe it was just a phase, maybe you were overthinking, maybe everything is fine, but it never stays. It comes back for a moment, then disappears again. And that's when you start feeling something you've never really felt before. Not just sadness, not just confusion, but the feeling of caring more than someone else. And when that hits you for the first time, at that age, it changes you. That feeling of caring more than someone else, it's something you don't understand the first time it happens. Because in your head, you're thinking, how can I care this much and they don't feel the same? It doesn't make sense. You replay everything, all the conversations, all the late nights, all the moments that felt real, and you start questioning all of it. You wonder if you imagined it, if you read too deep into things, if you made something bigger than it actually was. Because how does something feel that real and still end up one-sided? So you try to fix it, not directly, but in small ways. You change how you text, you try to be more interesting, you try to say the right things. You become more aware of everything you do, because now you're trying to hold on to something that's already slipping. And the worst part is, they don't even realize what you're going through. To them, it's just a shift, just a change in how they feel. But to you, it feels like everything is falling apart, because at that age, you don't separate your feelings from your identity. If someone pulls away, you don't just think they change. You think, what's wrong with me? And that question stays in your head, quietly, in the background. Every time they reply late, every time they seem distant, every time you feel like you're trying harder than they are, you start shrinking yourself without noticing, trying to fit into what you think they'll stay for, trying to be enough in a way that makes them come back. But no one tells you this when you're younger. You can't fix someone losing feelings by changing yourself, and that's the part you learn the hard way. That's when it really starts to change you. Not just how you feel about them, but how you start seeing yourself. Because once you feel like you're not enough for someone, that thought doesn't just stay in that situation. It follows you. You start second guessing everything. The way you talk, the way you act, the way you show up. You think maybe you were too much, too available, too caring, too real. So you start holding back. Not because you want to, but because now you're scared of feeling that same way again. And the crazy part is, they probably don't even realize the impact they had. To them, it was just something that didn't work out, just a phase, just someone they talked to for a while. But to you, it was your first time feeling something real, your first time getting attached like that, your first time learning what it feels like to lose someone emotionally before you even fully had them. And that sticks with you, because now you know what it feels like to give everything and not get it back the same way. So the next time something like that comes around, you're not the same. You hesitate, you think more, you hold back parts of yourself you used to give freely. And that's when your teenage years start teaching you something nobody explains to you directly. Not everyone you feel something real with is meant to stay. After that, you start realizing something you didn't understand before. Not everyone feels things the same way you do. Because in your mind, if something feels real, it should mean something. It should last. It should turn into something more. But reality doesn't always work like that. Someone can talk to you every day, laugh with you, stay up late with you, make you feel like you matter, and still not feel it the same way you do. And that's confusing when you're younger, because you don't understand how something can feel so real and still not be real to them. So you start questioning everything, not just them, but the whole idea of what you felt. You think, was it even real? Did I just imagine it? Did I care more than I should have? But the truth is, it was real, just not equal. And that's a hard lesson to learn that early, because now you're not just dealing with feelings, you're dealing with imbalance. You start realizing you are the one initiating more, the one caring more, the one thinking about them more, the one building something in your head that they were just experiencing in the moment. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That's when things shift inside you. Not loudly, but quietly. You stop looking at it like something that ended and start seeing it for what it actually was. Something that meant more to you than it ever did to them. And once that realization settles in, you start changing in ways you don't even notice at first. You're not as quick to open up anymore. You don't say everything on your mind like you used to. You don't give your time as freely, because now you've seen what happens when you do. Not that you don't care anymore, it's that you care differently, more carefully, more guarded. Because before, you didn't think twice about it. If you liked someone, you showed it. If you cared, you gave it fully. No hesitation, no second guessing. But now, there's a pause, a moment where you think, is this even worth it? And that pause comes from experience, from that first time you gave everything and realized it didn't guarantee anything. So now you move smarter, you watch actions more, you notice effort more, you pay attention to how someone shows up, not just what they say. And even though it makes you more aware, there's a small part of you that misses how you used to be, the version of you that didn't overthink, the version that just felt things fully without fear, the version that believed if something felt real, that means something, because that version of you was pure, unfiltered, real in a way that's hard to get back once it changes. But that's what growing up during those years does to you. It doesn't just give you memories, it gives you awareness. And sometimes that awareness comes from learning things the hard way. After a while, you stop blaming them, and you stop blaming yourself. Because at that age, nobody really knows what they're doing, not fully. They don't know how to handle someone who cares deeply. They don't know how to communicate properly. They don't know how to leave without hurting someone. And you don't know how to protect yourself yet. So everything becomes intense. The good feels really good. The bad feels really bad. There's no balance, just highs and lows. And looking back, you start realizing something important. It wasn't meant to last. It was meant to teach you. It taught you what effort looks like, what inconsistency feels like, what it means to care more than someone else, and most importantly, it taught you what you should never accept again. Because once you've felt that imbalance, you recognize it faster next time. You don't stay as long. You don't ignore the signs as easily. Not because you don't care anymore, but because now you understand your value a little more than you did before. And that's the shift. You're not the same person you were at the start of it. You're more aware, more careful, more intentional. And even though it came from something that hurt, that growth, that stays. And when you look back on it later, you don't just remember the person. You remember the version of you that existed during that time. The version of you that felt everything without holding back. The version of you that stayed up late just to talk to someone. The version of you that gave your time, your energy, your attention without thinking twice about it. And yeah, that version of you got hurt, got confused, got left trying to understand something that didn't make sense. But that doesn't make it a mistake. It makes it real. Because those teenage years, they're not just about what happens. They're about what you learn from it. You learn that not everyone stays. You learn that feelings aren't always equal. You learn that just because something feels real doesn't mean it's meant to last. But you also learn something more important than all of that. You learn how deeply you can care, how real you can be, how much you're capable of giving when you're fully invested in someone. And that's not something to regret, that's something to take with you. Because one day, you'll meet someone who matches that energy, someone who doesn't make you question it, someone who doesn't make you feel like you're too much or not enough. And when that happens, everything you went through back then will finally make sense. Because those teenage years didn't break you, they built you. into someone who knows the difference between something that feels real and something that actually is. I don't think I ever wanted too much. I didn't need perfection. I didn't need constant attention. I didn't need someone to save me. I just wanted to be cared for. I wanted someone who noticed when I went quiet, someone who checked in without being asked, someone who didn't treat my presence like something optional. But every time I tried to explain that, it sounded like neediness, like I was asking for too much. So I stayed quiet. I accepted less. I told myself I was independent enough to not need reassurance, but deep down that wasn't true. I wasn't asking to be obsessed over. I wasn't asking to be put on a pedestal. I was asking to matter, to feel like my absence would be noticed, like my feelings would be considered, like I didn't have to earn basic care by being easy, understanding, or low maintenance. And every time I didn't get that, I told myself it was fine, that this is just how people are, that expecting care is unrealistic, that I should be grateful for whatever effort showed up, but wanting to be cared for doesn't make you weak. It means you're human. It means you want a connection where effort is mutual and presence isn't forced. And the hardest part is realizing how long you stayed in places where you felt invisible just because you didn't want to seem like you needed too much. I didn't want someone to fix me. I just wanted someone who cared enough to stay aware of me. At some point, wanting to be cared for turns into accepting the bare minimum. You stop asking questions, stop expressing needs, stop pointing out what hurts, because every time you do, it feels like you're asking for too much. So you adjust, you get excited over replies that should be normal, you appreciate effort that should be consistent, you thank people for things they do effortlessly if they truly cared, and you tell yourself this is just how love works. But deep down you feel it, the imbalance, the quiet disappointment, the way you're always the one paying attention. You're not asking for grand gestures, you're asking for awareness, to be checked on, to be considered, to feel like your emotions aren't an inconvenience, but instead you keep shrinking your expectations to fit what people are willing to give. You call it being low maintenance, being understanding, being independent, when really you're just afraid that if you ask for more, you'll lose what little you have. And that's the part that hurts, because you don't want more love, you just want the love that's already there to show up consistently. You don't want to beg for care, you want it to be natural. And the longer you settle, the more you start questioning yourself. Am I too sensitive? Am I needy? Am I wrong for wanting this? But wanting to be cared for was never the problem. Staying where you're barely noticed is. Pretending you don't need care slowly disconnects you from yourself. You start ignoring your own feelings before anyone else can. You tell yourself you're fine even when you're not. You swallow disappointment and call it maturity, because admitting you want care feels risky. It feels like giving someone power to decide whether you're too much, so you choose silence instead. You become the easy one, the understanding one, the one who doesn't ask for reassurance or consistency or emotional presence. And people like that version of you, because it asks for nothing, but inside something starts to dull. You feel lonely even when you're not alone. You feel unseen even when someone's there. You start questioning whether your needs are even valid anymore. That's when you know you've gone too far. Not by wanting care, but by convincing yourself you don't deserve it. You weren't meant to love people from a distance. You weren't meant to be strong at the cost of being felt. Care isn't weakness. Wanting it isn't dependency. It's connection. And the moment you deny yourself that truth, you don't just lose it from others, you lose it from yourself. There's a moment where it finally hits you. You've been caring for everyone else while no one was really caring for you. You remember how often you checked in, how often you noticed shifts in tone, how often you adjusted yourself to make things easier for others, and then you look back and realize how rarely anyone did that for you. No one asked if you were okay when you went quiet. No one noticed when your energy changed. No one slowed down enough to really see you. And And that realization hurts in a quiet, heavy way, because you weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking to be prioritized above everything. You were asking for reciprocity. To feel like your presence mattered as much as you made theirs matter. That's when the exhaustion sets in. Not physical tiredness, emotional fatigue. The kind that comes from always being the one who cares first, who understands more, who gives grace even when it costs you. You start wondering how you became so good at holding space for people who never learned how to hold it for you. And the truth is uncomfortable. You taught them it was okay to lean on you without leaning back, to receive care without returning it, not because you wanted imbalance, but because you didn't want to feel abandoned. And realizing that is both painful and clarifying, because it shows you something important. You weren't asking for too much, you were just asking it from the wrong people. That realization changes how you choose people. You stop being impressed by words. You stop getting attached to potential. You stop mistaking attention for care, because now you know the difference. Care looks like consistency. It looks like remembering. It looks like showing up even when it's not convenient. So you start paying attention to who checks in without being prompted, who notices when you're off, who doesn't make you explain why you need what you need. And at first that makes your circle smaller. You walk away from people you once would have stayed for. You stop overextending. You stop being the only one holding things together. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you finally care about yourself too. You don't chase care now. You don't hint at it. You don't downplay your needs to make someone comfortable. You let people show you how they show up. And if they don't, you don't argue with it. You don't try to teach them how to care. You accept the information and move accordingly, because wanting to be cared for isn't a flaw, it's a boundary. And the moment you start honoring it, you realize something important. You'd rather be alone than be surrounded and still feel unseen. Choosing yourself feels lonely at first, not because you made the wrong choice, but because you stopped filling the silence with people who never really saw you. You notice the absence quickly, the lack of constant conversation, the quiet that comes when you're no longer overgiving just to stay connected. And that quiet can be uncomfortable, because for a long time, being needed made you feel valued. Being available made you feel important. Being the one who cared most made you feel like you belonged. Now you don't do that anymore. You don't reach out first every time. You don't check in when it's never returned. You don't hold space for people who won't hold it for you. And yes, that leaves gaps, but those gaps feel different than the loneliness you had before. Before you were lonely even when surrounded by people. Now you're alone but at peace. There's no resentment building, no quiet disappointment, no wondering why you're not enough. Just space to breathe, space to feel what you feel, space to rebuild a relationship with yourself that isn't based on neglect. You start realizing that loneliness with self-respect is lighter than connection without care. And once you taste that peace, it's hard to go back, because you finally understand. Being cared for starts with not abandoning yourself anymore. Learning how to receive care is harder than giving it. That part surprised me. I was always good at showing up, at checking in, at being thoughtful without being asked. But when someone tried to do that for me, I didn't know how to relax into it. I questioned it. I downplayed it. I felt uncomfortable being the one who was noticed, because for so long, care felt conditional, like something you earned by being useful, easy, understanding. So when someone offers it freely, without you proving anything, your first instinct is to brace yourself. You wait for it to disappear, you look for the catch, you assume it won't last, and that's not because you don't want care, it's because you're not used to it being consistent. You're used to being the giver, the supporter, the one who adapts. So receiving feels vulnerable in a way giving never did. It means letting someone see you without performing. letting yourself need without apologizing, letting care exist without questioning your worthiness of it. That takes unlearning. It takes time to believe that you don't have to exhaust yourself to deserve tenderness. And I'm still learning that, still reminding myself that care doesn't have to be chased, earned, or negotiated. Sometimes it's just there, and allowing it in is the bravest thing you can do after spending so long surviving without it. At some point, you stop asking why people don't care. You stop replaying conversations, stop analyzing tone, stop wondering what you could have done differently, because that question only keeps you stuck chasing explanations instead of truth. So you ask a different question: who actually shows up for me? Not who says they care, not who means well, not who shows interest when it's easy, but who checks in consistently, who notices when you're quiet, who doesn't disappear when you need space or reassurance or time. And the answer is usually smaller than you expect: fewer people, less noise, more clarity. That realization hurts, but it also simplifies everything. You stop pouring into people who only take. You stop investing in connections that leave you feeling unseen. You don't make announcements, you don't explain your shift, you just move differently. You protect your energy. You reserve your care for those who return it naturally. And slowly you stop feeling desperate to be noticed, because you're no longer surrounding yourself with people who make you feel invisible. Care stops being something you beg for and starts being something you recognize. And that's when you finally understand being cared for isn't about convincing people to treat you better. It's about choosing the ones who already do. Wanting to be cared for doesn't make you needy. It makes you honest. Needy is asking someone to fill a void they didn't create. Needy is expecting one person to carry everything for you. But wanting care, that's wanting reciprocity. That's wanting your effort to be met, your presence to be valued, your emotions to be considered. You're not asking someone to revolve their life around you. You're asking them to see you. And somewhere along the way, you were taught that asking for that was too much. So you minimized yourself. You softened your needs. You told yourself independence meant not needing anything from anyone. But that wasn't strength. That was self-denial, because even the strongest people need to feel cared for sometimes, need to feel noticed, need to feel like their existence matters to someone else. You don't want care because you can't survive without it. You want it because connection is part of being human. And the moment you stop shaming yourself for wanting that, everything changes. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop pretending you're okay with being overlooked. You stop accepting crumbs just to feel included. You realize something important. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong people. At the end of all this, I realized something simple. Wanting to be cared for is not something I negotiate anymore. I'm done explaining why it matters, done justifying why I feel hurt, done shrinking my needs so someone else can stay comfortable. Care is not a bonus, it's not extra, it's not something you earn by being quiet, easy, or low maintenance. It's the baseline. If someone doesn't notice me, doesn't check in, doesn't consider how their actions affect me, then they don't get access to me. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, out of self-respect. I spent too long convincing myself that wanting care made me weak, too long accepting half presence and calling it connection, too long staying where I felt invisible, just to avoid being alone. I'm not doing that anymore. I don't need to be chased. I don't need to be obsessed over. I just need to be considered. And if someone can't do that naturally, without me begging, hinting, or explaining, then they're not my person. Because the right people won't make you feel guilty for wanting to matter. They won't make care feel conditional. They won't make you question whether you're asking for too much. They'll just show up. And until that happens, I'd rather stand alone with my needs intact than sit beside someone who makes me feel unseen. I didn't want too much. I just wanted to be cared for. And now I care enough about myself to never accept less again. I still remember the last message she ever sent me. Not because it was long, not because it explained everything, but because it didn't. It was simple, short, like it didn't carry the weight of everything that came before it, and that's what made it hit harder. Because how do you go from talking every day to one final message that feels like nothing? At first I kept rereading it, not because I didn't understand it, but because I felt like there had to be something more hidden in it, some deeper meaning, some explanation between the lines, something that would make it all make sense. But there wasn't. It said just enough to end things and not enough to explain them. And that's what messes with you, because your mind keeps trying to fill in the gaps that they left empty. I kept thinking back to everything before that message, all the conversations, all the moments that felt real, all the things she said that made it seem like we were building something. And then I'd look at that last message again, and it didn't match. It didn't feel like it came from the same person. Because how do you go from consistency to something that feels so detached, so final, without feeling final at all? The hardest part wasn't even what she said, it was what she didn't say. No real explanation, no real accountability, no real closure, just something that closed the door without ever fully acknowledging what was behind it. And that leaves you stuck in a weird place, because you're not just dealing with an ending, you're dealing with questions that never got answers. For a while I wanted to reply, not to argue, not to convince her to stay, just to understand, to ask the questions that were sitting in my head. What changed? When did it change? Was any of it real? But I didn't, because deep down I knew something. If she wanted me to understand, she would have explained it the first time. And that's a hard truth to accept, because it means the silence after that message was intentional, not confusion, not hesitation, a decision. She said what she wanted to say, and everything she didn't say was also part of that choice. After that, the conversation just stopped. No follow-ups, no checking in, no, how are you? Just silence. And silence hits different when you're used to hearing from someone every day. Because now it's not just quiet, it's absence. For a while I kept expecting another message, something more, something that would make it feel complete, but nothing came. And eventually, I had to accept something I didn't want to. That last message was really the last one. And over time, I stopped looking at it like something unfinished. I stopped expecting more, because sometimes closure doesn't come from another person. It comes from accepting what they already showed you, and what she showed me was enough, even if it wasn't explained. I still remember the last message she sent me, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. It was the end. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. And now I understand something I didn't then. The way someone ends things tells you everything you need to know about how they saw it. So I stopped waiting for another message, stopped looking for more words, because the last one was already saying everything it needed to, just not in the way I wanted. There wasn't a big moment, no argument, no dramatic ending, no clear, this is over. That's what made it worse, because the moment I realized she stopped loving me was quiet. It was in the way she talked to me, the way her voice didn't carry the same feeling anymore, the way everything sounded the same but felt different. And that's when it hit me. Nothing happened, but everything changed. At first I tried to ignore it, because when something shifts like that, your first instinct isn't to accept it, it's to explain it. Maybe she's just tired, maybe she's stressed, maybe she just needs time. So I kept talking to her like nothing changed. Like if I stayed the same, things would go back to how they were, but they didn't. The conversations were still there, but the feeling wasn't. She still replied, still answered, still kept things going just enough, but something was missing. That energy, that warmth, that feeling like she actually wanted to be there, and you can feel that difference even if you don't want to admit it. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Shorter replies, less emotion, less effort to keep things alive, like I was someone she talked to, not someone she was connected to. And that's when it started sinking in, because love doesn't disappear all at once. It fades slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you're the only one still holding on to what it used to be. And that realization hits in the smallest moments. A dry reply, a delayed answer, a conversation that used to flow that now feeling forced. I kept thinking it would come back, that maybe it was just a phase, that maybe I just needed to be more patient, so I stayed. I kept showing up the same way, hoping she'd meet me there again, but she didn't, and that's when it finally clicked. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet realization. I'm still here, but she's not. Not really. Not in the way she used to be. That's the hardest kind of ending. Because nothing officially ended, there's no clear moment to point at. Just a slow shift until you're standing in something that looks the same, but doesn't feel the same at all. And once you feel that, you can't unfeel it. You can try to ignore it, try to convince yourself it's temporary, but deep down, you know, something changed, and it's not coming back. The moment I realized she stopped loving me was the moment I stopped feeling loved by her. No words, no explanation, just a feeling that wasn't there anymore. And now I understand something clearly. Love doesn't just live in words, it lives in effort, in presence, in consistency. And when those disappear, the feeling follows. That was the moment, not loud, not obvious, just real. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind, because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing. And for a minute, it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight. No goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense. Just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run, because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, yeah, next time don't say so much. Next time don't get attached. Next time stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking, not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere, a slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything. Because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does, so you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore, you hold back details, you soften your honesty, you keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present, but there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them, and you hate that because you remember how it felt before, how natural it was to let someone know you, how easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. This safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud, you just feel them, and slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness. You just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth, and then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore, why being around people still feels lonely. It's because you didn't heal. You adapted. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you fully. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you. It just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same. But it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic. And the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet. To someone who avoids their own emotions, your honesty feels like pressure, your awareness feels like exposure, your care feels like responsibility. So they leave. Not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity, that's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming, I should have known better, I should have protected myself. But that's not growth, that's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting, you didn't mess up by being open, you didn't lose because you cared, you just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself, and slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential. You misjudge their capacity? Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. that's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less, it's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky, not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it. You move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow-through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over-explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate, that's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed. And for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection. Not constant intensity, just consistency, and that's how you know. Because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept. And you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind. Because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing, and for a minute it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight, no goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense, just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run. Because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, next time, don't say so much. Next time, don't get attached. Next time, stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking. not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere. A slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything, because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does. So you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore. You hold back details. You soften your honesty. You keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present, but there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them, and you hate that because you remember how it felt before, how natural it was to let someone know you, how easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud. You just feel them. And slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness, you just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth, and then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore. Why being around people still feels lonely? It's because you didn't heal, you adapt. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you, it just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same, but it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic, and the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet, to someone who avoids their own emotions. Your honesty feels like pressure. Your awareness feels like exposure. Your care feels like responsibility. So they leave, not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity. That's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming. I should have known better. I should have protected myself. But that's not growth. That's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting. You didn't mess up by being open. You didn't lose because you cared. You just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself, and slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential, you misjudged their capacity. Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less, it's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky. Not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it, so you move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate. That's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed, and for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection, not constant intensity, just consistency. And that's how you know. Because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept, and you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it.